Thank you.
Thanks, mate. That'd be, you can have it via video.
Given the alternate here.
Okay.
Yes. So, Assistant Commissioner's passage. The Coronial quote has resumed. Please be seated. And I'm told the live stream is operational, Robert. Yes.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Deputy Commissioner, you'll need someone in the witness box.
Yes. I think I had asked you about the peer support program, and you had indicated, sorry, Deputy Commissioner, I'm just trying to pick up where I left off, and the peer support program was being reviewed and developed further by the project team that you talked about.
That's my understanding, yes, Your Honour.
Sure. Now, another important aspect of member wellbeing we've talked about in the course of this inquest is fatigue and the effect that that has had and continues to have on members. Am I right in saying that the Northern Territory Police Force doesn't currently have a fatigue management policy?
Your Honour, unless I can refer to that in my affidavit, I'm not specifically aware of a specific fatigue policy other than just a high-level awareness throughout the agency and throughout the force as of the impact on service in community and elsewhere across the Territory.
Are you aware if the development of a formal policy has been discussed previously or whether that's been on the radar?
A formal policy hasn't been discussed with me, Your Honour. It may have been through our wellbeing branch and elsewhere, but not to me directly, no.
Okay. So I'm not trying to be tricky, I just wanted to check if it's on the radar and part of the reforms.
I think it links very closely to the wellbeing reforms, and I think fatigue is at the heart and back of mind of every senior police officer in the Northern Territory.
So you're open to the formulation of a policy being something that is developed as part of the reforms that are going forward?
I have no issue at all with that.
And I know your comments in your evidence previously about the need for more resources across the Northern Territory Police Force.
That's correct.
You've talked in your affidavit, and I'm specifically referring to the most recent affidavit at paragraph 278, and you surmised that the situation from the 9th of November and in the days leading up to that are unlikely or wouldn't arise again as there are more members stationed, particularly at Uendamu. Would you agree that whilst there are perhaps more positions and more members there from time to time, it's common practice for those members and at Uendamu and in other remote stations to relieve at other remote stations from time to time?
Yes, Your Honour, to assist with fatigue management right across the Territory, not just any one location.
So it could be the case that even though a station's member numbers might reflect that they have a full complement of staff, it's quite likely that some of those gazetted members are actually in other places.
That's possible and probable, Your Honour, but again, I think it does provide then some relief at the larger centres like Alice Springs, Katherine and Tennant Creek, who are also under immense demand for their services as well. So it's a balancing across the board, you know, take from one demand and put it somewhere else.
Sure. And just generally speaking, you've indicated in your affidavit that the reintroduction of the Territory Duty Superintendent position would be a positive contribution to managing resources across the remote stations. And I just wondered if you could elaborate on that a bit, and given that the numbers are moving around, so to speak, how that actually alleviates alleviates the problem of members working the amount of overtime they are in remote areas.
I think it does assist insofar, Your Honour, and for those that are listening, that if there is a shortage at a particular location, a demand on services that they can't meet, the Territory Duty Superintendent speaks to the authority of the Commissioner of Police and can rearrange the pieces of the board and take those resources from somewhere else. So ultimately it's always a balance between where we get them from, but the reality of it is if there's a really high need demand here now, we can take members from elsewhere to send there to help provide relief, with fatigue support, surge capability and their operational activity.
I accept what you're saying, but it's rejiggling existing numbers. It's not actually additional resources, so to speak.
No, the Northern Territory Police Force operate within the set parameters of our resourcing, Your Honour.
The last thing I wanted to ask you about, Deputy Commissioner, was just picking up on a matter raised by my learned friend from Naja about the employment of ACPOs. And I don't think there's any disagreement from anyone that they are an integral resource for effective policing, and you agree with that. I think you've said that in your affidavit.
Yes.
Now, it's specifically noted that ACPOs and constables receive similar training. ACPOs receive similar training to constables with the exception of instruction in relation to criminal code matters.
That's my understanding, yes.
They don't receive active armed offender training.
Oh, that may be correct. I'm not quite sure.
I think you've said this in your affidavit, your latest affidavit at paragraph 84, and you have listed them. Active armed offender training, the use of patrol rifles, mock pursuits, investigative interviewing, and domestic violence. So what I'm going to suggest also with reference to the determination relating to ACPOs, which is already on the brief at 18/15, that the only real difference between ACPOs and constables is that they have no power to investigate indictable offences. Would you agree with that?
That's correct.
And on a day-to-day basis, their practical work life is very much similar to a constable.
I would agree with that, Your Honour, and in many instances they are the other sworn member that accompanies the constable throughout their duties. The advice I have provided within my brief of evidence, though, is that tragically, unfortunately, indictable offences do create a significant portion of the workload of the Northern Territory Police. That's a significant difference between their...
Sure. But in remote communities, would you agree that predominantly the type of offences that police are dealing with are offences arising under the Domestic and Family Violence Act?
A significant workload, I'd suggest, yes, Your Honour.
Yeah. The Summary Offences Act?
I imagine, yes.
The Liquor Act?
Yes.
And some offences under perhaps the Misuse of Drugs Act?
Yes.
Now, none of those are indictable offences. Would you think it's that the role and remuneration and conditions of ACPOs should be more aligned to constables than, for example, the administrative stream of police or the auxiliary stream, as was pointed out yesterday?
I personally have no objection that we consider that pathway. I do, however, note with family and domestic violence is usually an element of a high level of criminality that is associated, perhaps serious assaults or serious harm. But as a general principle, I don't have an adverse position to that.
And similarly, just since you've raised the Domestic and Family Violence Act, I absolutely accept that in many cases offences under the Domestic Violence Act will also be offences under the Criminal Code. But one portion of the training that ACPOs don't receive as part of their recruit training is training in domestic violence. Are you able to elaborate on why ACPOs aren't trained in dealing with domestic violence situations?
Specifically, no, Your Honour, I'm not in a position to be able to provide any clarity on that, other than to say that family and domestic violence for the remainder of the year will be a significant scope of works for the Northern Territory Police Force. There will be an inquest before your courts later this year. There's a project team operating on that, which is looking at all the interconnectivity between roles and responsibilities right across the Northern Territory Police Force and indeed government to improve on that. And that may be a key recommendation the Northern Territory Police embark upon prior to your inquest.
So a recommendation could perhaps be that ACPOs also receive that training, and that would bring them further into line with like a constable, a recognition of the duties that they do, in addition to the unique competencies that my learned friend referred to yesterday. The other issue in relation to ACPOs is that the current structure doesn't allow a promotion phase for ACPOs so much. It's the move to a senior ACPO position is based on years of service. Would you be supportive of a promotional stream within the ACPO ranks?
Your Honour, I'm not fundamentally opposed to that either, albeit the pathway we would hope to progress path would be from ACPO to constable, so we can look at future roles at Commander, Assistant Commissioner.
Of course.
So in the perfect world, we would encourage ACPOs to transition to constable as a, it's a personal choice, I accept, but we would encourage them to look at the full sworn promotional pathway, and whether we can get initiatives that connect those better would be beneficial.
Sure. And right now, is there an identified pathway for ACPOs to advance to constable without going back and doing the full constable training?
Your Honour, I think, and again, I'm reflecting upon my memory, I think that we were looking at some those that had completed a Cert 4, for example, of the similar equivalent rank. I thought there was a, and again, I can't put my finger on it, but I thought we would transition straight to constable. I don't know if they met the requirements.
So it's dealt with in paragraph 88 of the third affidavit, Your Honour.
That's right. I guess what I was getting, that refers to courses, but what I was getting at is, do you foresee that it could be the case that if an ACPO has already received, for example, 24 weeks training, and all that's missing is that additional 6 weeks with those competencies that you outlined in paragraph 84, that ideally an ACPO could receive that additional 6 weeks of training and be a constable in a very short space of time?
As I said, Your Honour, I'm not fundamentally opposed to that, no.
They're all my questions. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Thank you, Your Honour.
Mr. Officer.
Deputy Commissioner, my name is Luke Officer, and as you're probably aware, I have constable role.
Mr. Officer.
There's 3 topics I want to canvass with you this afternoon. The first being the actual, or some of the matters on the 9th of November 2019. I appreciate you were in the Northern Territory Police at that time, but you've made some observations about some things. The second is the applications of use of force, and with particular reference to that date, 9th of November 2019, but the reviews that have been undertaken. And then finally, the issue of welfare. Before I do, Deputy Commissioner, it's been well established, obviously, you're here on behalf of the Executive of the Northern Territory Police. That is from the Commissioner all the way down to the Assistant Commissioners, all 7 of you. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
And you're here speaking on behalf of the Northern Territory Police Force as the Executive.
Yes.
And given the wealth of evidence about the comprehensive reviews that have been undertaken since this incident, and I think you said yesterday that this is perhaps the most significant incident facing the Northern Territory Police, at least in the last 30 or so years.
At least a decade, Your Honour, that I'm aware of, yeah.
And it would have been the subject of great discussion between the Executive from the start of your tenure in 2020.
In terms of its impact upon policing, yes, I'd accept that.
Well, it's led to comprehensive reforms, has it not?
I think it has, but I think some of those reform programs would have commenced regardless. I think this was prior to the employment or commencement of the new commissioner. There's his Back to Basics project was planned, approached anyway. I think some of the issues that later became apparent helped with some of the reform process though.
Yeah, so Back to Basics document's the one you
Correct.
referred to a lot, but what I mean is surely what you've discussed at the executive level is effectively lessons learned from what occurred on the 6th and 9th of November 2019 and since.
If that information was available, yes.
Can I ask, did you meet frequently to discuss the matters that you knew as an executive leadership team?
No. We had an organisational steering committee which is around the investigation pathways and tried to deconflict between the different pathways of investigation, but we didn't meet as an executive discuss Undamu at all that I recall as a specific incident, no.
Can I ask then, with all of these reforms and these reviews and lessons learned in the Commissioner's Back to Basics plan, why are you here representing the executive and not the Commissioner?
Well, I'm not sure.
He's the leader of the organisation.
Well, in my 40 plus years, I can't recall a commissioner giving evidence at an inquest. I was the one who was nominated by the commissioner to represent the agency, and I've done that.
So there was discussions about it.
Well, the commissioner, I don't think discussed it with me. He told me that I would perform that role.
I'll move on. You've made or given some observations about the 9th of November 2019, and you appreciate that you weren't present or weren't part of the Northern Territory Police Force at the time. You agree?
I wasn't, no.
And so, would you accept that at one level your observations are merely just another observation amongst the myriad of opinions and assessments of what occurred that Her Honour has before her?
I'd accept that, Your Honour.
You
And
based
the evidence I've observed in this court.
Yes,
in
based
this
on
inquest.
the evidence you've observed in this court,
Yes, Your Honour.
the body-worn video,
Yes, Your Honour.
materials you've read,
That have been provided to me, yes, Your
been
Honour.
provided to you, yes. Have you read the evidence of Constable Rolfe that he gave at trial?
I haven't specifically read the evidence of Constable Rolfe that he gave at trial, no.
Well, transcript 4074 of this inquest, your counsel said to you, now I think it is going to be a matter for Her Honour, as best she can on the basis of the 6 accounts that she has, she's about inaudible, we've yet to hear from Mr. Rolfe, but what took place with the briefing with Sergeant Frost to work through what was or was not said. Can you identify with confidence what was said or not said at the briefing with all the men at the station, which your answer quite rightly is no, Your Honour. The point I'm asking, if you haven't read Constable Rolfe's evidence at trial, how can you be of the view that they didn't follow a plan?
Because the plan says that they would start and commence at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's the evidence I've heard.
Yes, but you've also given evidence in this inquest that you understood that Sergeant Frost had said to the IRT when they departed at 7 o'clock, if you come across Kumanjayi Walker, arrest him absolutely.
Yes.
You've heard the evidence of the IRT members who've given evidence in this inquest?
I have.
Have you read their trial evidence?
I haven't examined their trial evidence. I've been briefed on their trial evidence as it progressed, but I haven't read their every transcript. No.
So you're aware, aren't you, that those IRT members, including Constable Rolfe, putting aside Senior Constable Donaldson, have given evidence that they never saw an email plan.
I've heard that evidence, yes.
So again, how can you be so sure in your observations that there was no following of the arrest plan?
Because they didn't follow the arrest plan.
Deputy Commissioner, how can you say that when you haven't considered a large portion of evidence that is before this inquest?
So, Your Honour, from the evidence I've been familiar with, the plans that I've read, the evidence that I've heard, they didn't comply with the arrest plan.
So selective evidence.
Are you putting a separate plan?
No, Your Honour, I'm putting what?
Well, I don't know that you can, it's fair to say selective evidence.
I'll withdraw it and ask a different way, Your Honour. You say at 4074, in response to your counsel, transcript 4074 in this inquest. Now, the IRT men received information that Kumanjayi Walker may well have been at 511 or 518, which was just close by. In light of the fact that they had taken it upon themselves to attempt on your account, on your evaluation, to arrest Kumanjayi sometime shortly after 7 o'clock, should they have been in communication with Sergeant Frost or anyone about the new idea that they had to go and get him at 511 or 518? In my view, would have been very prudent, yes. Remember giving that evidence?
Yes.
So, how can you be of the view that that would have been very prudent when you have not considered the evidence of those 4 IRT members who said there was no briefing from Sergeant Frost, and they were told if they had to come across him to arrest him absolutely?
But Your Honour, objection to that. No one said there was no briefing. There was a briefing to Donaldson, there was a briefing to Kirstenfeld and Rolfe, there was a briefing to the 5 of them. The issue is the content of each of those briefings, but there were 3 briefings. That's uncontested.
Well, the question had this proposition that there was no briefing.
Well, how can he be sure that there was a briefing? He has not considered the evidence of Constable Rolfe.
So are you suggesting that unlike all the other witnesses that we've heard, Constable Rolfe has a different account and there was no briefing? That's what you're putting to him?
No briefing to the extent in which that Deputy
Sorry,
Commissioner
you
said that they
said
haven't
no
followed the
briefing.
plan.
So if there, that's what I put to you earlier, suggested earlier. If you're suggesting a different version of evidence to obviously what the Deputy Commissioner is referring to, then you should take him to that evidence and ask him about it, or ask him to consider it.
Your Honour, we'll be here all day if I take the Constable Rolfe's evidence. I'm trying to be respectful to Deputy Commissioner, but also economical. Are you aware that Constable Rolfe has proffered a completely different version to the recollection of Sergeant Frost at his trial?
I'm aware. I can't. I didn't read the transcript of his trial. I don't recall here sitting now what the content of his commentary was. I am familiar with what I've read and what I've heard within the confines of this inquest.
I guess what I'm struggling with, Deputy Commissioner, is when you turn to page 4079 of the transcript in this inquest, when your counsel says, well, it just seems if Sergeant Frost has developed the plan, as far as we know it, hasn't been discussed in any detail. I don't recall Delafeo. There might have been some discussion. Surely it would have been her. In the way you're developing the scenario, it would have been necessary for her to be there to ensure a full briefing was provided. Your answer. So to give some clarity then, Your Honour, I don't believe sergeants are necessary for every briefing to perform an arrest from an action plan. It's a small location, perhaps if you're in a larger centre, Alice Springs, where you've got lots of activity, I agree. But I think where you've got a remote location, police effect arrests of people every day without a police sergeant being present. Do you recall that evidence?
Yes, I do.
And then the question that follows, so will Officer Alafaya have been then the forward commander so far as this arrest was concerned? Answer, well again, that's not clear within the plan, Your Honour. I think there would have been, at the next point, an opportunity for all of them to discuss who's doing what. It becomes very clear to me what's going to take place. And sometimes seniority is not the sole determinator of who's going to be the lead on that particular briefing. And you would receive direction on what action to take, who's going to go where. I imagine that should have occurred at 5 o'clock. Question, do you remember that evidence?
I do.
You say you received direction, but who takes the lead in giving that direction? Your answer again, Your Honour. I think the plan would have been broad enough for them to understand what the basic tenet of what they were required to do. That's my expectation of it. So I'm struggling with, Deputy Commissioner, your evidence, having not read Constable Rolfe's, that there has been disobedience of the plan, and the evidence I've just read to you about my words, tell me if it's right or wrong, there being some flexibility with how our plans are implemented.
plan of Sergeant Frost, as I've given evidence, was succinct, broad. My lived experience and what I see translates every day is police officers effect the arrest without a sergeant being present. And when we get in a room and say we're going to arrest Murray Smallpage, you see it all the time. We don't run through as a gaggle without some communication between each other as how that will transpose. That's not always written down in a formal SMEAC process or broken down to its minutiae detail. There'd be not enough hours in the day for the Northern Territory Police to effect every arrest. I think police officers, well seasoned, well experienced, do that frequently, Your Honour. I'm not sure what you want me to say. If they'd stuck to the plan at 5 o'clock in the morning, they would have had a conversation about what steps are going to take place. How hard could that be?
Because you haven't read the evidence against Will Rolfe with the greatest respect, Deputy Commissioner.
So explain it to me then.
Would you agree with this? That at its most basic level, there was a fundamental flaw in communication on the night of November 2019.
I think and I think I've previously stated it would have been much helpful if there had been a more detailed SMEAC delivered plan, so there's no confusion. Yeah, I agree with that.
And would you accept that there was, at some level, a misunderstanding of how the IRT operated, in particular between Assistant Commissioner Worst and Superintendent Knowles?
In what sense?
Well,
I think
this is general duties deployment on your evidence.
Yeah.
And if I'm incorrect, if it's general duties deployment, then there was no requirement for Assistant Commissioner approval by Worst to send the IRT out on the 9th of November. That's one misunderstanding, perhaps.
That's been dealt with a million times. He wasn't giving approval in his capacity as Assistant Commissioner. The evidence is that he was giving his approval, although he is an Assistant Commissioner, but filling in for the missing, I think, commander is the evidence.
Yes, but I think the tension is that Knowles thought he had to see that because of the standard operating procedure. I'm not talking about high risk or whatnot, I'm talking about the miscommunication and misunderstanding of whether or not it was required.
I object if there's any suggestion that that's of particular relevance in terms of a communication breakdown, because I read the evidence onto the record that he was seeking approval because it involved it was an administrative process because it involved resources. He wasn't seeking approval for the operation as a high risk operation, and so the relevance of it is lost in my respectful submission.
I'm not suggesting it's a high risk operation. It's being dealt with that noise into his general duties. I'm simply asking, do you think there was a level of misunderstanding as what was required to send the IRT out because of the very issue we're just debating, that between Mobs and Worst, there is a discrepancy as to what the purpose of their deployment was?
well, no, I think it's
Object. I don't think that is the evidence in terms of the purpose of their deployment. They were very clear that there were two reasons for it. It was, in effect, to assist in terms of the resourcing and also to assist with the arrest of Kumanjayi Walker. So it was for general policing, and they understood that it was to assist with the arrest of Kumanjayi. I've got the transcript references here for this.
Transcript 978 is to Assistant Commissioner Worst. If it had been raised with you, I withdraw that. What would justify the deployment of the IRT? Answer, if there was so the way in which the conversation with Superintendent Knowles and I transpired was, in my mind, the undertaking of a risk assessment in relation to that scenario. And I wasn't provided any information during that conversation that provided me with anything other than the need for additional frontline staff. If additional information was provided, then it may have justified a specific deployment, but that wasn't the request that was put to me. That's the evidence Assistant Commissioner Worst gave. Have you read that? Or were you present for that?
I think I heard it here, yes.
No, And there's no justification question, is there, for general duties of police to be carrying beanbag rounds? Answer no. And long arms, is there? No. So my question is, do you think there was a level of misunderstanding as to what was required for the IRT on 9th of November 2019 between Assistant Commissioner Worse and Superintendent Office?
If there's miscommunication, I don't think it was at that level of their misunderstanding. I perhaps suggest the IRT may have been misunderstanding, but I think we've heard evidence that McCormack instructed them to take all their kit, which included the beanbag shotgun. I don't think there was a direction that they had to carry it or use it. It was, as I understood it, to be in case event. That's how I've interpreted the evidence.
So when you say paragraph 259 of your third affidavit, the NT Police Force notes that there are some discrepancies in the recollections of Sergeant Frost, Superintendent Nobbs and AC Worst as to the role that each intended the IRT to play in UN removal. Is discrepancies a misunderstanding as to what to do with the IRT?
Well, no, I think it's clear they were deployed in a general support role. That's the evidence that's overwhelming that I've heard in this inquest, Your Honour.
Weeks until that. Would you accept that there's a responsibility of the senior executive in what occurred from the 6th of November 2019, starting with the absence of him?
In what context?
Well,
We may become aware, but
are you aware that Sergeant Frost had marked the 6th of November acts incident on the internal system as management significant?
no, I'm not aware.
Now, I appreciate that you with the Northern Territory Police on the 6th of November 2019. Hence my questions earlier about whether or not this has been discussed at the executive level. Clerk, can I please have the document I asked you to be placed on the screen? Deputy Commissioner Corona's got evidence before her from Ben McDevitt. Have you read Ben McDevitt's two reports he provided for the criminal trial and his trial evidence?
I've seen them, Your Honour. How much I can recollect of them, without refreshing my memory, I think it'd be a bit hard, but I'm aware, yes, he's provided a report. Yeah.
Who provided them to you?
I don't know whether it was part of this brief or I was aware he was going to give evidence at the criminal trial.
Have you read them?
I've got a general appreciation of what was said, and I can't recall specifically whether I've read them or someone's relayed them to me or someone's communicated that to me.
Were they discussed at senior executive level?
Perhaps Assistant Commissioner Antisich may have raised with me. I don't recall
What,
specifically.
passing or?
Yeah, I think as the trial's progressing, I think we were familiar with witnesses as they were coming and going and what's likely to come next, and things like that were brought to my attention, yes.
You're aware that he himself, McDevitt, was a former Assistant Commissioner of the Australian Federal Police.
Yes, I know Ben McDevitt.
And he had a very large hand in designing the safety principles model for the AFP, which in large measure was adopted in the Northern Territory Police some years ago. Aware of that?
I accept that.
So would you accept that? His opinion might hold some value.
Again, as I understood it, his evidence has been tendered and proffered and mulled over and examined by everybody.
Well, I'll take you to some parts of it. Starting under the head of introduction then, and I'm not going to read the first three lines, you can read those to yourself. But what he says is, in providing this opinion about the 9th of November, I consider it essential to examine the circumstances of a police encounter with Mr Walker 3 days previously on 6 November 2019, which should have alerted the Northern Territory Police Force NTPF executive to the need to take specific action in accordance with the published NTPF philosophy and policy on operational safety and use of force. See that?
Yes, I do.
that they did not unnecessarily place Constable Rolfe, together with his partner Constable Bell, in an unpredictable and extremely dangerous situation. Consistent with their accountability, the Executive should have fully considered the risks presented, which ought to have resulted in options such as deployment of the Tactical Response Group, adoption of a cordon and containment approach, development of an arrest plan options, use of hostage negotiators, and or deployment of additional physical and technical surveillance resources. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you agree with that opinion of Mr McDevitt?
I think that opinion reflects perhaps a Rolls-Royce plan by the Australian Federal Police, and I don't think it reflects the nature and extent of policing in the Northern Territory in remote locations. No, I don't agree with it in its entirety at all. No, I don't.
You accepted a moment ago when I put the proposition, had you been aware, because I know you weren't there, that if Julie Frost marked this as management significant, you would have been aware as an executive member of the police.
Well, no, I didn't acknowledge that. I think under the new current system with the Territory Duty Superintendent, can I just expand upon this so everyone's got clarity? The Territory Duty Superintendent, acting as the Commissioner's representative, would coordinate resources, not the Deputy Commissioner, not an Assistant Commissioner, not anyone else. At some point, as that matter progresses, they prepare what's called a ZZ notification, which is pumped out in an email, and I may read of something that's happened that was a police officer injured, a significant event, a fatal crash. If it required extensive further work, it would be referred to an appropriate member of the Executive at that point, but not before. So, for example, a high-risk deployment by the Tactical Territory Response Group would require permission of an Assistant Commissioner, not a Deputy Commissioner, and he would receive that advice and he would approve that process and he would be briefed at that point. I don't think that existed in 2019. So, again, Your Honour, I think to suggest that members of the Executive know every time there's something dangerous or serious happening in the Northern Territory at any given moment of the time is not accurate. Somebody in command would become aware, and if it was really significant, they would ring me or the Commissioner or some, but that didn't occur in this instance, to my knowledge, Your Honour.
Deputy Commissioner, it was marked as management significant, and an Assistant Commissioner was told of it on the 9th of November. Do you not think, based on what Mr McDevitt refers to, that perhaps there should have been greater senior executive oversight of what was to occur on the 9th of November because of the absence of it?
But they were deployed in general deployment as general support. In that role, they are acting as general duties police officers as they would anywhere else in the Northern Territory. And I think that was the response that we'd expect from them. I don't know that, no, I don't think that would happen. That's not how we operate as an agency.
Deputy Commissioner, that's precisely the point. They were deployed as general duties after an absence on the 6th of November to apprehend the very person who committed that offending. Are you saying that because they were deployed that way, it absolves any senior executive responsibility?
Well, with the greatest respect, Your Honour, I'm sitting here answering questions. I'm not choking my responsibility or that of the Northern Territory Police Force at all. We're here to learn how we can improve upon this.
Which is why I asked Deputy Commissioner if the senior executive read Mr McDevitt's report.
Yeah, I've indicated that I'm aware of the contents of the report. But again, let's unpack that. If you want to take the time, I think as we've discussed, Your Honour, around resource commitments, if the Territory Response Group attended, they would bring specialist capability. They're not; those specialist capabilities don't exist everywhere.
Deputy Commissioner,
Sorry, I think
I'm just noting, we weren't given a notice of this document. Ordinarily we redact. It's not a criticism, it just displays the deceased's real name. And so if reference isn't being made to this page, it just asks that it come down off the live stream.
No oversight, Your Honour.
It wasn't a criticism.
No. So, Deputy Commissioner, I'm not asking you to agree with Mr McDevitt. The problem my client has is that it seems to me you haven't even considered the opinion despite wholesale overview and policy change of the department because of this incident.
I think, Your Honour, there's evidence contained within the brief of evidence from former Assistant Commissioner Beer. I think we got Superintendent Gill, both of which are recognised, maybe not Assistant Commissioner, but certainly Superintendent Gill in his review of the IRT, appropriately to what the Northern Territory should respond to and how it should operate. And as a result of those recommendations, we abolished the IRT. There will only be one response capability, and that will be the TRG.
Deputy Commissioner, and let's turn to Dr. Beer for a moment. Have you read her statement? Which is
Uh,
712, I think it's the third statement. She gave the audio one.
The audio statement.
Well, it's transcript of her.
Okay,
interview with
I'm
investigators.
aware there's one there. I can't recall the specific detail of it.
Not
There's,
sure if you've read it.
I believe I have, yes. I can't refer, if you can refresh my memory, I'll go to that point that concerns you and I'll try and explain.
She was an assistant commissioner at the time of the incident.
She was assistant, I think acting deputy commissioner at the time.
Deputy higher.
Yeah.
And Mr. McDevitt is critical of the lack of oversight and urgency of the senior executive to deal with the matter once it became apparent on the 6th of November as to what had occurred. And the IRT was deployed on the 9th of November 2019. Acting Deputy Commissioner she was at the time says at page 19 of that interview that she did not know what happened on the 9th of November. She didn't know they were being deployed, didn't know their roles, what equipment, did not know the facts. So when Mr. McDevitt talks about senior executive oversight, she's an acting Deputy Commissioner of Southern Command, I take it?
No, I think of the Northern Territory Police Force at the time.
But she was from Southern Command.
Acting as the deputy commissioner in Darwin, as I understand it to be.
Do you not find it surprising she did not know?
Your Honour, I think we need to talk this through. I strongly suspect deputy police commissioners and commissioners of police right across Australia do not get notified every single time that the Territory Response Group or whoever their specialist capability is responds to tasking. That is the responsibility of those commanders and those in the field to operate, and we train to deliver that. And I think that's unrealistic to expect that as a deputy commissioner, I get told every hour they need 7 deputy commissioners to answer all the calls that we take. It's not practicable. It's not how it operates. And I don't accept that.
Your evidence is it's not practical, it's not how it operates.
In-
Is that
What?
what you said?
yeah,
That's what I said.
Yeah, I'm just clarifying that because at
Well, I didn't need clarification.
paragraph 277 of your third affidavit,
Yep.
if the incident were to occur again today, it is expected that the relevant Sergeant Ewan DeMille would advise the TDS. The TDS would prepare and send an email notification to all executive members, comprising commanders, assistant commissioners, deputy commissioners, and the Commissioner of Police.
That's correct, but it's a notification. That's not a responsibility for me that I have to approve something, authorise something. It comes out as an awareness. So I am briefed frequently on incidents after they've occurred, and if I have to make a decision, I'm briefed about a decision I need to make. But that's exactly how it operates.
Exactly. That's the point, Deputy Commissioner. Do you acknowledge what Mr. McDevitt says, and you simply have to agree with it or disagree with it? Because the change seems to be exactly what he recommends in his report, that there was insufficient executive oversight of this matter from the 6th of November when it was marked management significant by Sergeant Frost.
Well, no, I don't accept that. I think, no, I don't.
Do you accept page 6, please? The report. Halfway down, sorry. Halfway down, Deputy Commissioner, starting with, in my view, the NTPF senior executive failed to fulfil its responsibility of support and commitment to the principles of operational safety and use of force and its overall management of the NTPF response following the 6th November incident involving Mr. Walker. Evidence of that failure is present against almost all 10 principles of operational safety and use of force, and then they list them, which are the very ones you've given evidence about that the IRT did not follow. You see that?
Yeah, I can read that.
Now, the operation, the general order for use of force, which is subject to review, I think, to be promulgated in March this year, is not deviating too much from the previous one, is it?
My advice.
And now that you're all going to be made aware of an incident such as the accident scheme occurs again, do you accept what Mr. McDevitt says, that the safety principles and the use of force apply equally to decisions made at executive level as they do those rank and file in the front line.
Again, Your Honour,
Your Honour, that's not a correct characterisation of what Mr McDermott says. I read it. He makes a criticism, but he doesn't say it's the same for different levels.
Do you accept that you should consider that safety operational principles, the 10 when you make executive decisions about an incident like the accident?
I've just tried to clarify, Your Honour, we don't make executive decisions about deployment. That's done by those relevant people. I'm advised of an incident. I don't make a determination about what equipment they carry, where they go. I'm briefed on what's high level, appropriate with my rank and appropriate with my position, and those that are appropriately trained take control if I have to deploy the TRG or specialist deployments. They're trained for it. I am advised on either, usually it's after the event, what's happened, or Deputy, we're about to undertake a high-risk deployment for a person who may be armed or whatever the case may be. But, Your Honour, it's not an approval process, and it's not something that I'm forced to consider every single tactical operation that's made by the 1,600 cops across the Northern Territory.
What about risk assessment? Deputy Commissioner, what about risk assessment?
Yes?
Do you think that senior executives should have some say in response to police officers being charged up with an axe? I'm talking about if it were to happen again, because they're your words. Do you not think the senior executive should have some responsibility in risk assessment in response to an incident such as the 6th of November?
So in terms of a response, is what you're saying? That
Having some responsibility.
we always have responsibility. Usually when we become notified of events such as, our primary focus, as the very senior, is welfare and well-being. Pick up a call, are you okay, what's happened? There are the machinations and the layers of command and control within the Northern Territory Police Force and every police force within Australia that manage that regularly.
Move on to a different topic. I'm going to talk to you, if I can, for a moment about welfare.
Yes.
Give us some evidence before Coronial. I think it was the first day that you said to the effect that one of the most important aspects of a police officer is to show respect.
Yes.
You gave evidence that you yourself, Deputy Commissioner Murphy and others make phone calls to members to ring and ask, how you going? Remember that evidence?
Yes, I did.
That members reach out to each other to support their colleagues.
I do.
And when you were confronted with the horrible concept of member suicide, your words were that we're a family and we all soul search, wish we could find a way to deal with it, that is suicide. Remember that evidence?
I do.
And in your third affidavit, page 236, paragraph 236, the NTPF takes the wellbeing of its members and volunteers seriously. And then at 237 and 238, you give some indications or evidence about what procedures are in place. Now, just ask you this, where does a member go if they have some sort of scepticism about speaking to professional services or employed by the Northern Territory Police?
So if I get some clarity, they can reach out to peers. We've talked about peer support. We can talk out to colleagues. They can, if they wish, they can engage their own medical practitioner. They could do a myriad of things.
They can also be directed about what they said to another member, can't they? To give an interview about it?
In what context?
Well, any police officer can be directed to give an interview about what they said to another police officer.
Well, they can,
Context
but
of
why?
the complaint.
But why? In context, if there was a complaint or something, I can understand. But not if you're generally talking about well-being.
Deputy Commissioner, I don't ask this question as a criticism, but I seriously ask, if a member does not want to use professional services of employees and staff of the Northern Territory Police, and I'm sure you understand why they might not to in a particular circumstance, where do they go? Who do they turn to?
Well, they can turn to family, they can turn to friends, they can talk to chaplains, pastors. They can, as I said, they can engage their own private medical practitioners. They can seek their own help. There's no single answer that I can give you that encompass the factors that you may be able to undertake. You don't have to utilise Northern Territory Police Wellbeing Services. It's not mandatory.
No, I know, that's the problem. Where do they turn? Police officer suspended for 3 years on a murder charge. Who do they turn to if they don't want to use Northern Territory Police staff?
Well, they can consult with whoever they wish. We don't force them.
I'm not asking about forcing, I'm asking.
Well, you just said a minute ago that you're saying, well, we should have sent a psychologist to knock on their door when they're not required or they don't wanted. I'm not aware of that. We would reach out independently of the executive, anyone else, to provide that support, and they do it. They do it frequently. They do it all the time.
Which senior member of the executive, in the 3.5 years Constable Rolfe was suspended awaiting his trial, picked up the telephone and rang him to say, how are you going?
Well, first and foremost, I think that that puts
Which senior executive
no, stop. I think at the end of the day, in fairness, I'm trying to answer that question. There are a number of ongoing legal proceedings that prevented, and it would be inappropriate for a senior member of the Northern Territory Police Force to pick up the phone and discuss it with him.
I didn't say that, I asked, how are you going? What is inappropriate to ring your member? Yes, it's a very serious allegation, but with all the stresses that he confronts as a serving police officer, what is wrong with ringing him and asking, how are you going?
Well, Your Honour, I don't think it was appropriate in those circumstances with what was going on that we do that. And I think we were very conscious and cautious of all the legal proceedings, everything else that's gone on for the last 3 years, that we were seen to be absolutely acting with a straight bat and to do no action that would impede anything. And that's exactly what we did do.
Do you understand, on my instructions, this is a very significant issue to my client, that for the entire period of his trial process, not one single member of his management team, because he's your employee, ever just picked up the phone and asked, how are you going? Do you understand the seriousness to my client about that?
Again, Your Honour, I can understand how he sees it, but the reality of it is, with all of the legal proceedings that were underway, we received numerous directives from the union, from the lawyers, not to contacting him. Don't ring him. He reached out. He did speak to Assistant Commissioner Porter. Independently, we get another letter. Don't speak to my client. Don't speak to my client. So the reality of it becomes very complicated in terms of who do I listen to, where do we go, what do we do?
Deputy Commissioner, are the letters to which you're referring where lawyers say don't speak to him simply a response to a disciplinary allegation or checking on welfare?
Well, they didn't say that, did they? They just said every time that he reached out to a senior member of the Northern Territory Police Force, we then get further advice, don't contact him. I think from your office. How do we navigate that pathway?
Can you please produce a letter where I have ever advised you not to talk to my client about his welfare?
Perhaps it didn't come from you. I don't know where it come from,
Or
but
anyone in the senior executive?
I think we can produce a letter. I think there's stuff that has been provided that don't speak to my client. So the confusion exists, but in my mind at least, at what role do I play in that? Where does the senior executive play in that role? I don't want to prejudice anything that may affect the well-being of your client.
Given that difficulty that's been confronted in relation to welfare, is there in the new welfare review a path forward for supporting a member of police when there are disciplinary or criminal matters proceeding?
Yes, Your Honour, and there is. Acting Commander Atkin is his appointed contact person. So it's a senior person in the police. It's not the Commissioner of Police, it's not the Deputy Commissioner of Police, but a senior person is nominated to be their contact point. And they were and still remain that. Is there not?
Sorry, I was not acknowledging, I was just sort of clarifying the evidence. It's an acting commander.
Deputy Commissioner, you were present.
Sorry, is that what occurred with Constable Rolfe?
Yes, Your Honour.
And that is supposed to remain available for any police officer who is facing disciplinary or criminal matters. There is a method of...
An officer is appointed to be his key contact point, check on his well-being, how they're going. That's their function.
But you at least appreciate how my client feels that no one from the executive leadership just asked how he was going. You at least appreciate that.
Your Honour, again, it's a very difficult vexed position. I've tried to articulate it as again. This is not done to spite Constable Rolfe, if that's what it's portrayed to be. I think it's a very difficult position as a senior executive with all of the legal processes that are going on prior to the inquest. I am aware he was receiving, I think at one point it was Assistant Commissioner Beer may have even been his nominated welfare point. At different points, somebody's appointed to take on that key role. You know, there's a difficulty in terms of being in the senior executive, may have to be a decision maker in a disciplinary matter and then reaching out to people before those matters are resolved. I think it's creates a conflict of interest. It's not done to spite someone or to deliberately harm them. And that's the point I'd like to make.
I think Assistant Commissioner Beer was certainly present in the very few days after the incident before he was flown to Darwin, arrested and returned to Canberra. But from there on in, my instructions are no one from the senior executive bring him to just check on his welfare. Despite you just saying in your evidence this week that that's what you do now.
When they're injured, yes.
When they're injured.
Yes. So if I get a ZZ notification they've been assaulted, and it's not every instance that you're on, it depends on my availability and the others, but it is a position of us that we pick up some member of the senior member of the Northern to pick up the phone and check how they're going. It doesn't mean that I pick up the phone for the next 5 years and speak to somebody. I mean, I'm very conscious that we're a small agency. We have lots and lots of police. We try and look after them as best we can, Your Honour.
Your Honour, there's a statement from Superintendent Atkins, who then was on the brief at 7-5, which includes reference to communications that he had endeavouring to support.
That's not disputed, no?
7-5.
Police shootings are infrequent, unfortunately, in the Northern Territory, though, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
And certainly officers being charged with murder are very infrequent.
Very rare.
And you're aware, albeit you weren't there at the time, the Northern Territory Police at the time Constable Rolfe was arrested, but he was very swiftly publicly identified.
I believe there's evidence of that, yes.
He was flown to Darwin, what he believed was on the pretences of then travelling to Canberra. Are you aware of that?
On the pretence of going to...
Before he was arrested.
It's my understanding he was flown to Darwin for his well-being, for safety reasons, for security reasons.
And then arrested.
And he did go to Canberra from Darwin.
Months later, he was in custody.
I'm aware he was subsequently arrested, yes, Your Honour.
You can appreciate the effect it has on him from a mental health point of view. At that time, those particular facts being publicly identified and arrested and charged.
Again, you know, I can imagine it was very distressful.
And you're aware, are you, or are you aware that he had to move house because of threats made to him?
I've read that somewhere, Your Honour.
And as you noted, middle of last year, Assistant Commissioner Porter did facilitate attempts for Constable Rolfe to return to work. Are you aware that Constable Rolfe first reached out to try and facilitate that as opposed to the reverse?
I'm not familiar with the sequence of events, but I'm aware that Assistant Commissioner Porter was dealing with this issue, yes.
You directed Constable Rolfe to take leave on the day of his acquittal, didn't you?
In a formal letter, I believe, yes. Yes.
No longer any prejudice of compromising the trial, did you ring him then and ask how he was going?
No, I didn't, because there were still disciplinary matters that were afoot.
Well, exactly.
So those things, if I may be an officer that's forced to make a determination, I thought it was imprudent or unwise to ring him. I thought it would potentially be a conflict of interest between my role and responsibility as the Deputy Commissioner and others in a better position could provide that support.
And Deputy Commissioner, on my count at least, it's been dealt with ad nauseam and other witnesses, there are at least 6 Section 79 notices my client has been served with since May 2021. You would agree with that, accept that?
If that's the truth, yeah, I accept that.
Have you read the affidavits of Assistant Commissioner?
I've read,
Porter?
yes, sir.
So you'd be aware of the various disciplinary matters?
Yes,
They can be taxing on members,
I'm sure they can.
and you're aware that lawyers get involved and advice is given and things become litigious.
Yes,
And that's another stressor, dealing with the legal process.
yes,
And this Coronial is very stressful to members of your organisation.
yes.
In fact, are you aware that Constable Rolfe, when he did return to work, was directed not to attend police stations or gyms, the police gym?
I'm not familiar with the details of exactly what he was instructed or not instructed to do.
You yourself agreed yesterday, I think, in evidence that this matter has been very isolating to a whole raft of people.
It has.
Do you think Constable Rolfe feels isolated?
I'm sure it's been very distressing for him, yes.
In fact, you were here yesterday when Sergeant Nankerville gave evidence, weren't you?
Yes,
And 28 years later, he still suffers the trauma of a police shoot.
yes,
Constable Rolfe's a 33-year-old man now, I think, must be a little bit younger. 30.
yes.
And you would appreciate that the protraction of all of these matters for legal reasons is very detrimental to his welfare. Would you appreciate that?
Your Honour, I think they need some clarity in concept. Some of the protractions are beyond the capability of me personally, and I think beyond the capability of the Northern Territory Police Force as a whole. Their legal processes, they are well resourced. They're going down a significant legislative framework. I can't influence those timelines, Your Honour.
Did you speak to or ring Sergeant Nankerville after yesterday?
Did I what?
Speak to or ring Sergeant Nankerville
I spoke to Sergeant Nankerville here as he walked out the door.
after his evidence
Yes, I did.
to offer him some comfort,
If I could, yes.
to see how he's going?
Yes.
And I understand your evidence to be that you're not going to contact Constable Rolfe to see how he's going.
There's still, Your Honour, there's still a raft of issues surrounding Constable Rolfe. And, you know, if I can reflect on some of the things that are in the public arena, you say he wants to speak to a member of the senior executive.
But in any event, there is an allocated person for his welfare.
There is, Your Honour.
And if you would like a phone call in relation to his welfare, that allocated person is available.
24/7. And the full extent of our...
Allocated person contact Constable Rolfe's lawyer to find out whether or not there is a conduit there for contact to be made to find out how he's going and whether or not there's any other assistance that can be offered.
We can do that, Your Honour.
That will be continued to be offered to Constable Rolfe
Yes, of course.
as a member.
Whilst he remains a member of the North and Post, I'm sure there's that facility.
One thing you didn't mention in one of your answers, and I think it's available to police, but I'd like to have it confirmed, is ESA, EASA.
Employee Assistance Program, EAP, and there's, I think ESS was a service provider that...
And they're not employed by the police, are they?
No.
They're independent.
And can I, for all those... No, Your Honour, and for all those that are listening, even with our own in-house psychologists, they don't provide information back to the executive of the Northern Territory Police Force about details of people that they are providing counselling and support for. That's not their role. We don't seek that information.
So there is an outside service available.
Yes, Your Honour.
Police. Yes, Dr. Dwyer. Thanks, Leon.
Deputy Commissioner, I'm just going to pick up on some of the questions that you were asked by parties to date. Firstly, two issues in relation to the deployment of the IRT on the 9th of November. By way of clarification, you were asked some questions about communication breakdowns or possible communication breakdowns, and you've given evidence that it's your understanding that Superintendent Nobbs and Assistant Commissioner Wurst were both very clear this was general deployment. It was not a high-risk deployment pursuant to the IRT SOPs.
That's
right?
correct.
And you sat in court, didn't you, to hear the evidence of Superintendent Nobbs and Assistant Commissioner Wurst in that regard?
Yes.
Superintendent Nobbs gave evidence, for example, and just for the benefit of the transcript and those listening at transcript 1102 to 1103, he said the purpose of the arrest was twofold: to assist with general duties in the context of breaking the back of the property crime issue, giving the community some broad-based reassurance and providing a respite opportunity to the members who'd been working over the preceding 3 or 4 days, and to assist with the arrest plan for Kumanjayi. That's your understanding?
Yes.
And when asked whether it was a high-risk deployment, he said, certainly not by my assessment of things. There was a heightened sense of risk with Kumanjayi, but in terms of looking at the term high risk through the lens of this SOP, Standard Operating Procedure, as a trigger, no, he wasn't high risk within that context.
That's correct.
And Assistant Commissioner Wurst gave evidence on the 5th of December 2019. You listened to his evidence?
I did.
And he said, as I understand, it would not normally require Assistant Commissioner approval to deploy in these circumstances because there was no high-risk element at that time.
Correct.
That was his evidence.
Correct.
And he said, the reality is it wasn't a high risk. In my understanding, there's no communication that it was a general deployment. That's the basis for your evidence yesterday, or a few days ago, I think now, that it's my understanding there was no miscommunication that it was a general deployment.
Correct, Your Honour.
You've given evidence about the involvement of Derek on the night, and I just want to clarify with you some of the evidence that Sergeant Frost gave about her relationship with Derek.
Yes.
And it's important, as you know, because Derek and Warren and family members are listening to this evidence, and it's important to them.
Yes.
Sergeant Frost described Derek like this. She said, we had a very good relationship. This is on the 21st of September at page 778. Derek was invaluable to me. He wasn't always available. He would always tell me, though, if he couldn't assist in something because of a poison relationship or something like that, he would tell me. But he was really valuable, and particularly when there was a lot of disturbances going on in the community. I think just Derek's mere presence has really helped and can calm a lot of the people because he can then communicate with them in language. He knows and understands a lot of why something has happened, and he knows relationships. And she goes on to talk about him being incredibly valuable.
Yes.
In terms of valuing the work of ACPOs to the work of constables, do you recognise that an Aboriginal liaison officer or an ACPO will have a deep and valuable level of knowledge that can never be possessed by somebody who's not an Aboriginal person?
Yes, I accept that as a golden principle and the reason we are embarking on the pathway we are.
And that needs to be valued, doesn't it? In the same way that you might value other technical skills.
Yes.
And I'm not going to tell you how you should remunerate ACPOs or ALOs here, but do you appreciate that there needs to be ongoing review of the salary structure to make sure that that deep and valuable knowledge is properly compensated?
I accept that, yes.
In relation to the challenges that ACPOs and ALOs might find themselves in, Sergeant Frost alluded to the fact that Derek would be open with her where he needed to sit out of an arrest. You recognise, given your experiences, that there might be experiences of conflict with ACPOs or ALOs?
Yes.
And there'll need to be good lines of communication with ACPOs and ALOs in place.
Yes.
Are there any resources, for example, protocols or training, to help police officers, ACPOs and ALOs, navigate those conflicts?
I think, Your Honour, we've referenced the mentoring program that within my affidavit as a commencement of some sort of pathway, so we can provide that mentoring advice. You know, I can imagine it's very daunting coming in as an ALO from somewhere into all of a sudden you're working in the police station around people that are unfamiliar with processes, all those things. So I think the mentoring program's one way. And that's a two-way street in terms of we have to educate our police officers as well what roles and responsibilities we expect of our employees. They're not police officers. And even if you are an ACPO, if you haven't got the necessary exposure experience to rely upon other means. So, no, I think it's a really important point. But I think, as I've tried to highlight, Your Honour, we're on the beginning of a pathway. There's no finalised system or place that's been tested is the best way yet. Communications is the key.
If you're an ALO or an APO from the community working for the community, it's particularly invaluable, isn't it? Because you've got a depth of knowledge and language often,
And yes, that is correct.
but also might present particular challenges with the conflict.
And I'm sure it does, yes.
Would you be open to giving consideration to a written protocol, developed obviously with the assistance of your Aboriginal staff or by the Aboriginal staff, about that?
No objection at all.
Do you agree that Derek, if he's willing to, might be an excellent resource for you in that regard, in identifying the best resources?
Dependent on locality and culture as appropriate to that place. I think the key is really trying to identify who's the best person at a given place, but certainly you and me would be a marvellous resource.
So in terms of the induction manuals that you now have locally, might it be helpful to include a segment on that, on how to deal with conflict and who to reach out to get the knowledge?
Absolutely, yeah.
Perhaps while I'm dealing then with the induction manual, I appreciate your evidence that this is a journey and these are not fixed documents. Mr. Bowe took you to a document which is in our brief at 12-4, and not all of that needs to come up, but I'll just note that Mr. Bowe is asking you some questions about what's in this general induction about the Coniston massacre, and you acknowledged that you memorised the document, but you accepted that there was nothing specific in here about the Coniston massacre.
Correct, Your Honour, and I'm not sure what date that's, how recent that document is.
I just want to take you to some, I appreciate you might be open to including this evidence. So that document notes that unfortunately some of this, I'm reading from it, some of the history in Australia involved a number of massacres that many Indigenous people still feel strongly about. This has resulted in suspicion of police being passed down through families and a resentment of white authority. So there is acknowledgement of that in that general induction.
Yes.
If I can ask you to accept from me that within the timeline that Mr. Bowe took you to with the historical overview, there is included in that history, including the Bidjigal resistance in New South Wales, the Mile massacre in 1838, evidence of the stolen or information about the stolen generation, the Wave Hill walk-off.
Yep.
They're things that many Australians are ignorant of, aren't they?
I suspect, yes.
And it's a very important lesson for Northern Territory Police to learn as part of their induction.
I think it very valuable,
I
yes.
think the point that Mr. Bowe was making was that although it references a number of those important tragic historical events, there's no specific reference to Coniston, which is a particular tragedy for the Northern Territory.
Yes.
Would it be appropriate to include it in that general?
Yes, I think it should.
In the induction into Yuendamu, which I will ask to come up, Beck, if you don't mind, 7-120BB, it's the annexure to the Deputy Commissioner's Statement, MS06. Again, there's some evidence specific to history and the local history. Page 5 of that document does refer to the tragedy of the Coniston massacre. And it notes that the conflict and reprisals that followed the Coniston massacre in 1928 resulted in dispersal of people from their traditional lands and constitutes an ongoing source of transgenerational trauma for Warlpiri people. But that's an important recognition in that local document, isn't it, Deputy Commissioner?
Yes.
It's on page 6 of that document.
Yes, page 6, second paragraph.
That's all right, we can... If you can get that back up again, Beck, because I want to point to you to a particular deficiency in the document I'll ask the Deputy Commissioner to reflect on now. Page 16-17 has community contacts. Just scroll down, if you will, please, Beck. You have a look at those key community contacts, and if Beck would scroll down to the next page as well, I think you'll notice, Deputy Commissioner, that there does not appear to be any Aboriginal people listed as part of the complex. If you'll accept that from me into the next page as well.
Yes, Your Honour.
Clearly there should be community contacts that are in Aboriginal organisations and key contacts.
I would have thought at a local induction level there should be some key contact points. Primarily a lot of the stuff around this induction package is around emergency management, you know, so where you see about the fire captain and, you know, flooding, fires, in terms of getting resourcing to assist them. But I agree there should be some, and if it's not written in a formal document, I think when you reflect, when we're out at those localities, Dr. Dwyer, we see on whiteboards and of all the pen, they're all the local contact numbers.
All right.
It should be captured and formalised.
I take it you would be open to any suggestions from those people at the bar table who are scrutinising that document as to how it can
The
be.
better feedback we get, the better the document get, then we can use it, Your Honour, as a better template for the others that are works in progress as we advance it. Because I think, as I said, we're open for anything to suggest to improve our
I'll just
process.
make this point about that document. It does specifically refer to the fact that this inquest has highlighted that racism has been exposed in the Northern Territory Police Force in
Yes.
a small number of officers.
Yes.
Or you don't shy away from that, including
No.
in an induction document.
Nope.
Deputy Commissioner, perhaps while I'm on that topic, we're going to hear from Assistant Commissioner Porter about a number of disciplinary processes more broadly. In his affidavit at 7-11D at paragraph 82, that doesn't need to come up, that's just a reference. He identifies that there have been a number of officers outside those identified from Constable Rolf's phone who have been disciplined as a result of racist communications. You recall that?
Yes.
Some of those have been suspended for a period of time. Some of those have resigned during that process.
Yes. Yes.
It's going to be an ongoing process, isn't it, for the Northern Territory Police Force, perhaps all forces around Australia, to be vigilant, to stamp out racism where you see it.
Absolutely, Your Honour.
Your response to it, in terms of the disciplinary process, will depend on the circumstances of each case, won't it?
They will, yes, that's correct.
And will they also depend on the response of the member once that conduct is identified to them?
Clearly, I think that's the heart of that process, acknowledgement.
So if, for example, you had an isolated incident, I'm not downplaying the seriousness of any incident involving racism, but if there was an isolated incident, somebody was under enormous stress when it happened, they were incredibly remorseful, they expressed their remorse and regret, they were prepared to do whatever training was required to ensure that never happened again, that would all be something that went very much in their favour.
And those factors would be taken into account, yes.
And you would be offering that person your support, wouldn't you, to address their behavioural
You mean my personal support or the agency support?
the agency's support.
I think the agency as a whole would hopefully, yes, we encourage, in the perfect world, those people to talk and communicate frequently what their exposure was, to share with others, so we share that, you know, the impact of it is. And again, already I think I've highlighted through this inquest process where people here at Alice Springs, and as I said, Bradley Wallace, his evidence was just powerful in terms of perhaps where people hadn't looked at the consequences of their text messages, and you hear it from somebody how deeply it affected them. I think they're really good. The Bradley Wallaces of the world and those others within our agency that can help share that message will shape us into the future, I think.
In your final affidavit from paragraph 62, you talk about the leadership that's been shown in relation to text messages, those racist text messages that have been revealed. At paragraph 62, you say that the police force has taken and is taking a number of active steps to address racist and inappropriate behaviours. It's particularly focused on ensuring that members of high rank in leadership roles are aware of the standards of behaviour. As the Deputy Commissioner, what was your response when you found out that there were sergeants involved in the exchange of racist text messages with Constable Rolf?
Well, I was confronted. It just, to be blunt, initially I was speechless. I didn't think in 2022 that I would be reading, of Northern Territory police officers of all, we're the one jurisdiction where we deal with the most vulnerable Australians all the time, and when those deep-seated views or when they're exposed just surprised me greatly and shocked me.
So you go on to note at paragraph 63, during 2020 and 2021, the Commissioner of Police, Deputy Commissioner Murphy and yourself met personally with each member of the rank of Senior Sergeant, Superintendent, Commander and Assistant Commissioner.
That's correct.
That was in Darwin, Catherine and Alice Springs.
That's correct.
There were a number of reasons that included trying to enhance the relationship between the executive and operational officers.
Correct.
And also to drive cultural reform, including in relation to your expectations around racism or stamping out racism, correct?
Yes.
And following those meetings and based in part on them, decisions were made about opportunities for career development of members.
Yeah, their future development, where they'd like to go, what rank they want to be, what they saw the future of the Northern Territory Police Force.
Can you tell, Her Honour, how were those meetings received by your senior officers?
By and large, I think they were extremely well received because, as I indicated, they were accompanied by a workshop led by Assistant Commissioner Wurst and others around Project 2030, which was the strategic direction of the Northern Territory Police Force. It was an opportunity for people within those ranks who were present to talk about the very issues we've been discussing in this place, their journey, what they've seen. I heard really powerful stories from different ranks who would stand up and talk about areas of our agency, areas of their career that they thought hadn't been as effective as others. They were very open. In my whole career, the ability to get a Commissioner of Police, 2 Deputy Commissioners of Police and others in any one moment in time was a really rare event. And for us to be able to, as a collective, to make time to do it with every member from those ranks up, I still maintain is probably one of the most powerful things I've been involved with. And I think it was very well received by the workforce, for those officers that we spoke to. And they provided very frank and fearless feedback to us.
You go on to note that in October 2022, the Commissioner of Police commenced meetings with each of the 195 sergeants in relation to the same matters.
That's correct.
And at the time of writing the statement, the Commissioner of Police had met with 23 sergeants and that work continues.
That's an ongoing scope of work, John. He's in Alice Springs at the moment, so I don't know how many he's had a chance to do down here.
A broadcast also went out to all officers that the use of racist, misogynistic, disrespectful, homophobic and sexist language is reprehensible, contrary to the Northern Territory Police Force Code of Conduct and Ethics, and constitutes a serious breach of discipline.
That's correct.
So no officer could be under any illusion that this is conduct that will not be tolerated by the Northern Territory Police.
And it will be treated as a serious breach of discipline under the provisions of the Police Administration Act.
In your statement makes it clear that the broadcast sent to all officers stated that the Code of Conduct and Ethics does not provide an exemption for private conversations that involve expressions of racism, misogynistic, disrespectful, homophobic and sexist views. They are incompatible regardless of whether they are private or public.
Correct.
And intended as such, correct?
Correct.
It's important for the culture of your organisation that everybody's on the same page about those expectations, isn't it?
I think so, yes.
And important for the morale of all officers?
I think intrinsically all of these issues link back to morale. Yes, I think it's really important that they know that how we're going to treat something and what our expectation is. And I don't think you can be tiptoeing around the issue. You have to be frank and tell them exactly what we expect and then hold people to account.
Particularly important for your Aboriginal staff, I imagine.
Very important. And Your Honour, I think it's 34% of our agency that identifies either female or Aboriginal. It's a significant portion of our force. I think they deserve respect.
On the 23rd of February of this year, Constable Rolfe published an open letter He's still a serving officer, correct?
He is?
Still on the payroll, correct?
Yes?
And in that publication, he says, I've been painted as a racist, violent cop. I went to a boys' school and then joined the army. My playground language is sometimes crass and rude, and most would find it offensive, but I use it in private with no intention to harm, with others who understand this. Is that an excuse to use it in private?
Under the instruction we've just provided, I don't accept it as an excuse. No.
Is it consistent with the Northern Territory Police Force Code of Conduct and Ethics?
No.
Is it a mixed message as a publication? Well, I withdraw that. Is it completely contrary to a publication of the Northern Territory Police Force?
Well, it's contrary to our values as we've expressed them, Your Honour.
He goes on to say, I have used rude and racist terms regarding nearly every race, most often my own. Is that an excuse if you use rude and racist terms about everybody, including if you're
I don't believe so.
Caucasian? He goes on to say, when I have used these terms in the past, I've used rude and racist terms regarding nearly every race, most often my own. I've done it in private with others with a shared background. I should not use these terms, and I'm sorry for using them. Would you like me to read the remainder of it as well? I'll read the entire.
Not sure if the learned friend is proposing to ask anything further about that document. We'd request that you refrain from doing so because there are issues arising from it which are live, and the constable has been required to provide an account of his conduct in writing this document, and he is due to provide that account by Sunday. And it is possible that other matters will ensue shortly thereafter.
I'll ask a different question, not involving that actual publication, but for the benefit of my friend, I think, would you, Mr. Officer, like me to read the conclusion of that, the whole paragraph?
Without asking a question, just to ensure that it's accurately presented.
Yeah, that's right. There is words used that you started using in there.
Right. I've read those terms, you can tell me that. If somebody were to suggest that it was acceptable to use racist language in private with your friends if you didn't intend it, would that be consistent with the Code of Conduct with the Northern Territory Police Force?
It's still inconsistent with that instruction we've provided, Your Honour.
One of the things in terms of mental health of police officers that we've heard is important is a sense of camaraderie amongst officers. You would accept that?
Yes, Your Honour. Very team-based.
And you've anticipated my next question. Important for any team, really, isn't it?
Yes.
But particularly when you're doing the really difficult, challenging work of a Northern Territory police officer.
Yes.
In terms of morale, where police officers attack each other in public, does that in itself affect morale adversely?
I'm sure it does. I'm sure the whole environment creates numerous communications. It creates divisions between the agency that we probably don't encourage, we don't want, we don't need. It's divisive. It undermines the executive. It undermines leadership at every level, I think.
Are you aware that in the wake of Constable Rolfe being charged with a criminal offence, there were public attacks on him, so I withdraw that, on officers like Sergeant Frost,
Yes.
Sergeant Barron?
Yes.
There were criticisms of Lanyon Smith and Chris Hand in public.
Yes.
Are you aware that that adversely impacted their wellbeing and their standing?
Just before that, I just make it clear that council system is not putting that that's coming from my client.
I'm not,
Just so this is clear.
there are,
Constable Rolfe.
sure, I think on the website I support Constable Rolfe, there were a number of criticisms of that were extremely aggressive in nature, were there, of other officers?
Yes, including myself, Commissioner Chalker. I think everybody who's walked within a senior leadership role has been denigrated, abused. It's just been disgusting.
Particularly abusive in terms of Sergeant Frost, a female officer in your ranks?
There's been some horrendous things written.
And
Yes.
have you come to understand that that has had an extremely distressing impact on a number of your officers, including...
Yes, Your Honour. I say this for everyone's benefit, including Constable Rolfe. No one's walked away from this process without some emotional and psychological damage. That'd be my assessment. It's been a very, very traumatic, difficult, confronting incident, and it's been challenging for the Northern Territory Police Force as a whole.
And you would include, in terms of understanding the adverse impact, you would accept when you, what Mr Officer put to you, that this that the charging process and the investigations are likely to have been distressing for Constable Rolfe too?
Yes, Your Honour. I'm sure they were.
Is it in any way appropriate for any officer faced with any investigation to attack another officer, or to have others, or for others to attack your officers because they're somehow involved in a process?
In my view, no, Your Honour. I mean, the reality is if there's another critical incident, tragic incident such as this, and that's probable or possible, we will appoint investigators. We will appoint people. They don't get a choice in what roles and responsibilities we allocate them. We don't ask them, do you want to do this particular task? They get sent there, and they, if they have a conflict of interest, they may declare it, but generally we expect them, and I'm sure as does the community as a whole, expect Northern Territory police officers to act without fear and favour and go and do a thorough and competent investigation regardless of it. But it is very, I do know that cohorts of specialists were very challenged and disturbed at the particularly in social media world, attacking their credibility, their professionalism, right down to appearance. It's really been quite disgusting, is the only word I can use.
I don't know if you were in court when Sergeant Barham gave his evidence, but he talked about the thin blue line, and what really affects the thin blue line is when officers attack each other in that way.
Yes, I agree, Your Honour. And as a small police force, unlike some of your larger police forces, we are predominantly built on relationships, friendships, relationships. Everyone works with everyone else. Everyone who knows and works and lives in the Northern Territory know everyone else. It's a very, really, it's a very small place. It's particularly heightening and distressing, I think, in a smaller place, and it's very challenging.
In terms of a different topic, the IRT, there were 2 reviews at least done in relation to the IRT after Kumanjayi's tragic death. One was, you referred to the report of Officer Beer on the 27th of November 2019, and then there was a more in-depth review by Officer Sean Gill. Both of those are attached to your affidavit of July 2022.
Yes.
They identified deficiencies, including the absence of appropriate risk assessments, for example.
Yes.
And soon after Kumanjayi's death, the IRT was disbanded, and you've given clear evidence it is not to be reconstituted, correct?
That's correct.
The reliance now is on the TRG if there is any high-risk incident.
That's correct.
I anticipate that we will hear some evidence that there are some police officers who are concerned that Alice Springs might be left without an effective TRG component because of the tyranny of distance. Is there any consideration about that, or what's your view?
Well, Your Honour, within our current resourcing footprint, there is no capability for that. I think the Northern Territory Police Force would be open into the future if we had a greater resourcing capability, that we would consider that. But at the moment, it's not on the table. I am aware from my exposure and experience across Australasia that not every jurisdiction has multiple tactical or TRG teams throughout their jurisdictions. And at the moment, we think it's most appropriate, and our current submissions around additional aircraft, pilots, all relate to our ability to have a response model out of Darwin in a quick and appropriate timeline.
In relation to the questions that you were asked by some of the lawyers for families and also by Mr McMahon for the Perumperu about the carrying of guns, I'm not going to ask you to go back over your evidence about that. You've given evidence, though, that there are some circumstances where clearly police can use their discretion to not carry a gun. Going into schools for a chat with kids is an obvious one, isn't it?
I think there's been some evidence led. Again, as I said, Your Honour and Dr Dwight, you know, we're not out there every day policing our police to make decisions about what they think is appropriate at any moment given in time. The general order is designed around our operational footprint to provide safety and security for the police and the community. The order says you'll carry them, but I'm sure there will be at times when it's not appropriate to do so.
And you would allow for an exercise of discretion in those circumstances?
Again, most of the times it will never come to me anyway. I won't know about it.
Sure.
And officers will go about their duty as they've always done.
Would you be open to considering some sort of protocol or general order that had a carve-out for circumstances where you would not carry guns, and the protocol that would be developed in consultation with the Aboriginal communities?
I'm not fundamentally opposed to that. I just think, Your Honour, there's the circumstances where that may exist is going to be very, very difficult to define, to articulate, to identify. Again, I've got no issue around the community themselves speaking to their local police and coming up with solutions. They did. I mean, maybe we're not going when there's onto law ground. I mean, we comply with lots of local cultural sensitivities anyway. But again, as a general principle, the order is that you will be wearing all your safety and accoutrements.
So that's the general principle, but there could be also scope for agreements to be reached for particular circumstances where guns are not required.
Again, I think the mutual respect agreements provide an opportunity where we can explore that further. I'm not prepared, Your Honour, at this moment to come up with a hard and fast rule.
I'm not asking you to, but you're open to the possibility of exploring whether or not there might be some specific local agreements reached where there might be occasions where it might be possible to agree that guns would not be worn.
Again, Your Honour, I am in principle. I think that those types of incidents, in my mind, there may be one officer who would go to a school or two, but there others would be available for rapid deployment and they can carry their guns as normal, for example.
But we've already talked about the school situation.
So it might be,
and
yeah.
that seems like it might be a starting possibility for that kind of discussion.
Correct.
Because here's some other carve-outs, Deputy Commissioner, that you might consider, and I'm not asking you to agree to them in the witness box, but just to give you some reassurance about the examples. Meetings with elders in the leadership team. Obviously, you're not going to need to carry a gun in those circumstances.
If it's done, well, again, Your Honour.
You don't have to respond, let's just have...
If it's at the police station, if they have them at the police station, that'd be a good start.
Okay. I hear what you're saying, that you are not closed off to the possibility of these discussions. The mutual respect agreements are the appropriate way in which to negotiate.
To commence that discussion.
We heard from when you were giving evidence on the first day, when Dr. Freckleton was asking you some questions, you gave some evidence about the increase in crime rates over a period of time in Alice Springs, and then a significant decrease in some good news as a result of the introduction of alcohol restrictions.
Yes, I unfortunately don't have those data, but as recently as this week, I'm talking to police in Alice Springs about the impact.
And you've also referred to the words of the Commissioner and echoed them, that there are complex traumas that the Northern Territory Police Force is asked to deal with.
Yes.
And you can't police your way out of the complexities that are caused from colonisation and decades of discrimination, correct?
You're on, and I think, Dr. White, the term I use, we can't arrest our way out rather than police. So I think policing provides a lot of other solutions other than physical arrest. But I think, as we've discussed, Dr. White, prisons are full. Police have been extremely busy exercising that dimension of their responsibilities in law enforcement.
And we heard from Senior Constable Wallace, you were in court when he gave evidence on 2 separate days.
Yes.
Did you agree that his evidence was extremely thoughtful and insightful about some of the complexities?
Very impressive.
And he talked about the challenging work environment for officers, that officers are often dealing with children in the early hours of the morning, some of whom might be cognitively impaired, some of whom have backgrounds of extreme trauma. And in terms of cognitive impairment, it might affect their ability to make decisions under stress. Very challenging for police in those circumstances.
Extremely challenging.
He also said this, he said, I think the police are always the last port of call to deal with difficult situations. So a lot of the offending happens at night time. So it's the police who are out there dealing with these young, vulnerable people. He also said, I think on the whole, from what I've seen from working with Strike Force Viper in the last 6 months, where the bulk of young people's property offending is addressed, it's done in a professional and effective manner. He said, at 3 o'clock in the morning, when we're dealing with a 15-year-old youth who's committed offences, with cognitive impairments or impairments due to FASD, we don't have on-call capability to ask for territory families or any other support services to come and help. It's left to police. What in an ideal world would police like to be able to help them to deal with those difficult circumstances?
Well, I think, Your Honour, this has been the subject of much debate, many inquests, lots of discussion. In a perfect world, we would have support services, you'd have safe places for women and children, you would have ability to disengage from a policing model to get someone else to pick up that issue, so you could focus on primacy around law enforcement. The fact is they don't exist. And I think in that sense, my earlier commentary around additional resourcing is because we are the only in-field 24/7, 365 days a year service provider in the field. And unfortunately, we are the first point of contact, and I use the terminology, the only government agency who will go anywhere, anytime to do anything. It seems to be we are asked to do everything. That weighs heavily on our membership. It weighs heavily upon our officers who are called upon to make really difficult decisions around really complex issues, where our primary training is around law enforcement. And with all due respect, you can't expect police to do anything else if that's our fundamental training. To their credit, right across the Northern Territory, our men and women are out there doing amazing work in all these issues, and they are providing really responsive and appropriate care with people who often don't want it, who are affected by drugs, alcohol, and it's challenging. I can't understate it enough. And the increase in demand that I talked about over the last decade is a real thing. Our workforce are challenged by it, because unless there is some other mechanism that steps in and breaks that demand cycle, I can't see any change shortly.
What you'd like to see ideally, wouldn't you, is a reduction in the amount of behavioural problems you've got to deal with, and therefore you need fewer police, ideally.
Well, I think that's the long-term aim, but I think it's a bit of a cart and a horse. And again, if I can talk in a generic principle, we've heard lots of evidence, even in this place, about unrest, safety and community. If you don't have sufficient numbers of police in the first instance to provide that safety and security, my better experience and long-term experience, you won't be able to recruit teachers, you won't be able to recruit health professionals, you won't be able to get other people to go to the community, because the artificial creation of it's a dangerous place. We can't go there. And the first step in my mind is to create a safe environment for everyone.
We've recently seen in the news some recognition of the need for better resourcing for the community of Alice Springs. Are you aware of any resources coming in to assist police from a welfare perspective?
Again, I'm not aware, Your Honour, I've focused heavily on what the police response should be and how we could better resource our Alice Springs here. I haven't significantly studied what the additional resource component will be, but I do know they are looking around those support services to provide additional support.
So are you aware of high-level meetings between the Commissioner,
Oh,
for example,
correct.
and other agency heads to get better resourcing and to help the community?
I am aware that the Commissioner of Police is meeting with all key stakeholders, including Northern Territory Government and representatives of the Commonwealth Government, to look at how we can better coordinate services, one, and resource services better. So they are ongoing as we speak.
Do you know, and if you don't, we'll no doubt have an opportunity to get more evidence of this, whether or not those resources beyond police, but that would assist police, include things like bail hostels for kids, support services for the victims of domestic violence, welfare services for young people who find themselves homeless?
Some of which I am aware, even as recently as the announcement when the Prime Minister was here. I think there was 2 million announced for, I think, at Tangier Women's Council for family and domestic violence. I think there's an allocation for Northern Territory Police around family and domestic violence. I think, without reference to that publication, I can't, and what I've seen previously, I can't quote the figures, but there is certainly provision for some of those others. Where they go, that would be decided others outside of police.
In line with what the evidence you've just given, do you accept that that additional resourcing is required in communities for agencies beyond police to be able to assist?
Yes, I think I do agree with that, and I think, again, my exposure and experience has been, in addition to just having additional resourcing, there needs to be greater coordination of service delivery, because again, most of those service providers operate between 8 and 4 Monday to Friday at best. That's not necessarily the operational footprint when they're needed. And I think there needs to be much more responsiveness to when we have availability to provide support services. Health, education. I mean, for every time there's a child out at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're not going to school the next day. It's a whole joined up approach we need. And it's complex and it's a wicked problem, and it's been ongoing not just in the Northern Territory, but it's been ongoing my whole adult police career. And we've yet to been able to find a solution, unfortunately.
Do you recognise that a very important part of the solution is empowering Aboriginal communities?
Yes, Your Honour, and I think we're advancing through that pathway now more than we've ever done, and I suspect we won't reap the benefits of any of those for some time, but I am committed that I think that is part of the future direction that the whole nation will go down.
The last topic, Deputy Commissioner, is in relation to the recruitment and reappointment of officers. You've noted in your last affidavit the recruitment and reappointment general order is being drafted, and I think was expected by the 31st of August 2022. I might have read your middle affidavit in that regard. The question I have for you is in relation to recruitment.
Yes.
Has the investigation, well, I withdraw that, has the focus on some of the challenges for Alice Springs made it difficult to recruit?
One of the things I think Assistant Commissioner Portal might have greater specificity around the numbers, but we have successfully recruited above attrition since my appointment in the Northern Territory. So we are attracting, and I think we've graduated over 300 plus recruits in the last 3 years, since 2020. It's been significant. It's probably been effective, but again, balancing it off, and I touched upon it briefly, we have every jurisdiction in Australia have got jobs everywhere, and it's a competitive marketplace for experienced police officers, and the skill set that we have here is very attractive elsewhere. To recruit someone in who's got those experiences and backgrounds is really, really helpful.
So what do you want to say, well, you've got the chance, to potential recruits about why working as a police officer in the Northern Territory? So
again, I think, and I'll say it publicly, for all of our police officers out there right across the Northern Territory, it is I'm still here. I'm still policing, probably not that front end anymore, but the ability to work in remote and regional locations and be that point of call to help the most vulnerable Australians is probably the most rewarding things you'll ever do in your life. I think it's a rich journey. I think you learn as you go. It's on the job. The places you go, the things you'll see, the people you'll meet are just extraordinary. And if they're looking at me, it's just been one hell of a ride, and I would encourage everybody that would embark upon a career. It's a fantastic career, and it will take you many places, and I think come on board, come on up. We'd love to have you.
Those are my questions, John.
Anything arising, Dr.
Yes, thank you, but it'll be very brief, Your Honour. Keen to proceed. Fear that the line will drop again. You've given evidence, Deputy Commissioner, about the stresses for members of the police force of these proceedings and the adverse publicity in certain parts of the media and on certain websites. Has it been particularly difficult for the Indigenous members of the force?
I'm sure it's been very difficult. I think it's had an effect, and we've already heard that evidence in here. All of a sudden, people you've worked with, you think are thinking there of me and my family. People I knew and trusted are thinking of me differently. If they really held that belief, why did they be my friend? I mean, I think it touches at the very outside of just wearing a police uniform. I think it touches upon your personal relationships and how you'd feel. It'd be very distressing.
Aside from anything else, aside from all the reforms that you identify in Exhibit 12 to your third affidavit, is there quite an amount of healing that needs to be done within the force?
Yes, Your Honour. And again, for every police officer that's listening out there, for all of us, it's been a really significant impact upon the Northern Territory Police Force. It created deep factions early in the process. It has attracted voluminous material, positive, negative, abusive. There's no winners anywhere that I can see in any of it. And I would urge that we take the learnings from this inquest, the good and the bad, what we did right, what we did wrong, and adopt a bit of a warts and all approach and try and find a way as an agency to be better, to make sure that we try and prevent it ever happening again, that we move forward. I think, the reform process has been under the cloud of this whole inquest my entire 3-year journey into the Northern Territory Police Force. And on behalf of all of us, I think we're all very, very keen that we can move forward and take the learnings. And on behalf of the Senior Executive, Your Honour, we await your findings, and we will take them on board, and we will do whatever we can to be a better police force. And as the last thing, I've been in this witness box for probably the longest I've ever been in a witness box in my career, Your Honour. But I mean it. We'll come back any time to sit here, to listen, to try and find a way to be better, regardless of the difficulty and the time that it takes. I think it's absolutely critical for us as a police force. So I thank you and everyone here for the opportunity to provide some evidence. I hope it's of value to the inquest.
Our learned friend for Mr. Rolfe has suggested that perhaps it should not have been you, but it should have been the Commissioner of Police who was giving evidence for the last week. You've been taken effectively offline during the currency of this inquest to sit here, to listen, to respond, to write affidavits, and then to be the voice of the force. Is that right?
Correct.
Would that have been feasible for the Commissioner of Police?
Absolutely not, Your Honour.
You've been asked too about whether the executive of the Northern Territory Police Force should assume responsibility for assessing risks for any given operation, such as an arrest of a person. What do you say about that?
I don't think I said for any and every operation, context after the incident, better identify incidents which followed. One like the 6th of November.
That's still that way.
It was very different.
That would be fine. All right, you've heard what's been raised. After an incident such as where a member of the community has used a weapon by way of threat, and there's been a response of the kind that there was from the two officers, is that a scenario in which the executive of the police force should be engaged in assessing risk?
Your Honour, I would like to say it's a rare event. In the 3 years I've been here, I've received, and we received, countless notifications of members of the Northern Territory Police Force being confronted with numerous weapons. We have police officers that respond to community unrest. I think there's been a number of murders where crossbows, bolts, machetes, guns, weapons have been fired, all responded to by local police, general duties police officers. The escalation in terms of a policing structure is from the bottom up. We don't have a TRG and superintendents and commanders and assist in every locality. We rely and trust upon our workforce that they respond first, and then we escalate the matter up. And then more police, more experienced police, specialist police come as that matter escalates up through the chains of command. It happens that way in every police force, and I take on board what Mr. Officer has said, but we would receive notification. I just want to make the point, Your Honour, it's usually after we've responded that I would get it, unless there was a specific need. They needed something from the chain of command. The delegated authorities have come down the rank to try and get the right people at the right place to make the right decisions as quick as we can, and not have to force it up and down a narrow pathway to get senior cops to approve routine policing. If it's really, really high risk, a TRG will be deployed, and an assistant commissioner will make a determination to approve it, and he won't approve it until such time as he's satisfied himself on their plan, what resources they need. That information doesn't come up all the way up through every chain of command. It goes to those specific people, and hopefully that provides a bit of clarity.
What would happen if the 7 members of the executive were involved in risk assessments in relation to these
I
types
think
of
we
risks?
need 700 members of the executive, Your Honour. I'm not making light of it. There is extreme levels of violence out there. I think they're well shown in the media, all the time. Our officers, our members out there do an amazing job. This inquest is around one tragedy. I think there's lots and lots of great work where we don't have a tragedy, and I think that's a very good thing. And I'm not trying to downplay this, Your Honour, but I think that's a reflection of the training that is out there, the commitment that's currently going on by the workforce.
You've been asked by our own friend Ms. Oslands about female members of senior ranks in the police force. Dr. Beer, I think, was an assistant commissioner, and at times, as we've heard, acting deputy commissioner.
That's correct.
Commanders Burns, Reid and Tonkin acted in recent times as assistant commissioners.
All have, yes, Your Honour.
And are there 3 of the 8 commanders currently, 3 of those female?
Correct, Your Honour.
Is there a wish to elevate, where merits permit, more female members to the higher ranks of the force?
I think, Your Honour, you will see we have some outstanding senior female leadership in the Northern Territory Police Force, and I've got no doubt into the future you will see many more.
Is that a personal commitment of your own?
And an observation as well, yes, Your Honour. I've seen many, I think, as we progress.
I'd like to turn as a last topic to issues relating to supportive members. First of all, would you mind turning to paragraph 239 of your third affidavit? This is a matter that Her Honour raised with you. What is the role of the Employee Assistance Program in providing psychological assistance and support to members?
As you said, indicates there, Your Honour, the Employee Assistance Program, it provides general counselling services pathway. It is available to employees and their immediate family or dependents, and we will pay up for 6 counselling sessions. Employees can self-refer or contact Wellbeing Services team for assisted referrals, and I'm pretty confident, Your Honour, that if an additional 6 services were required, we would try and accommodate that
And were someone such as Mr. Rolfe to seek that, would it be made available?
Absolutely, Your Honour.
Now, what hasn't taken place is a debriefing, and debriefings take place after critical incidents wherever that is possible. Is that right?
Yes.
What was the difficulty in holding a debriefing prior to the criminal trial, or even prior to the Coronial inquest before Her Honour?
I think, Your Honour, there was some really clear intent that we do nothing that would impede a fair trial of Constable Rolfe. And I think any debrief on finger pointing or trying to allocate improvements may have an impact later down the track at the criminal trial process. And
What about the inquest as well?
Again, I think, Your Honour, the inquest has kicked off very quickly after the conclusion of the criminal trial, so there wasn't been a lot of time, and I think the reality of it is, at the conclusion of these processes, we'll have a greater opportunity to take upon the learnings from this inquest and greater chance to speak to those intimately involved. At the moment, everyone has been sort of on eggshells, for want of a better word, Your Honour, to resolve this matter.
Is there an intention to do that which is possible, albeit now some years later, when Her Honour's findings are delivered, again to bring people together and to assist them to deal with the consequences of the events and of everything that's transpired since the death?
Yes, there is, Your Honour. I think that the reality of it is everybody, including the senior executive, have been waiting for the opportunity to give their evidence in the right forum and not to be going out and talking about this matter publicly until such time as we could present our evidence and everyone can present their evidence before this inquest.
What efforts have been made to support all members during the Coronial inquest?
Your Honour, every opportunity we've had, I've had a small team operating under Superintendent Kennan, who sits in the back of the court. We have our chaplains, we've got a welfare team, we've had our health and wellbeing, we've had psychologists flying down during the course of the inquest, and as witnesses are available, we utilise the rooms at the back there, we provide support, we walk to and from the police station with them in uniform, provide them support, so when the glare, it's been quite confronting, and we're providing all support we can as appropriate for everybody. We've offered that for everybody.
Thank you for answering so many questions, Deputy Commissioner.
Deputy Commissioner, it has been a very long but hopefully helpful and enlightening week for everyone who is participating in the inquest and for everyone who is following the inquest, and we do appreciate the time that you have devoted not only to being part of the inquest and following the proceedings, but that's clearly gone into you and your team in preparing the very detailed documents and commencing all the review processes that you've already undertaken, and we appreciate that. Thank you for coming to give your evidence.
Thank you, Your Honour.
I note the time. We have Officer Porter here. Do we wish to take a short adjournment? Do we wish to continue with further evidence today, or do we think we can complete it next week?
On Monday, Your Honour, we have. That's right, I've got it.
And you're free to step out.
Thank you.
On Monday, we have Miss Little, the Director of the Aboriginal Justice Unit, and Emeritus Professor Judy McCullough. I think that Professor McCullough is only estimated to be an hour maximum. It's difficult. Sorry? Longer. Okay. Well, I think that Miss Little and Ms McCullough are likely to take the bulk of the day again.
Then we're going to have a 10-minute break, and we're going to continue with the last 30 minutes of today. Just one thing I wish to raise. We haven't spoken about them for quite some time in the inquest. The text messages have come up again this week. In relation to the text messages, all of them are available on the brief of evidence.
They are, Your Honour, yes.
And if any party wishes for additional text messages to be included in those that have been discussed in the inquest to provide context or clarity. That invitation has been available to all parties to identify relevant text messages and bring them to our attention.
Yes, it has, Your
And
Honour.
that's been available since last year.
Yes, and I think in fact, absolutely, and in fact parties were asked to do that by the end of October last year, and a number of parties got back to us. So I don't suggest that is closed off, but could I renew that invitation, perhaps, Your Honour, if there's anybody who wants to, over the weekend, let us know if there's any additional text messages that should be in there.
Can I just raise a matter on that, Your Honour? I haven't reviewed its MFIC for some time, but Your Honour's probably aware there is judicial review proceedings in relation to some disciplinary matters which involve text messages. One of the questions of which whether or not it was lawful for the Northern Territory Police to obtain. I'm not sure whether it's intended that some of those are going to be canvassed or not, whether or not there's any
Look, the only
application.
ones that we've identified or that any of the parties have identified as specifically relevant to these proceedings are the ones that have been discussed in these proceedings. It's a question of whether or not there are others that,
That's my point.
so
Not all
if,
of them, I don't think, have been canvassed.
well, not all of the text messages, all the text messages are available to the parties, and the invitation has been standing since they became available for any parties to identify messages that might be relevant to these proceedings so that they can be considered for inclusion in a much more succinct document which is manageable rather than trying to trawl through the very, very large and unmanageable document which contains all text messages. But we'll adjourn, and as I said, for 10 minutes and then we'll come back.
Well, Spence is very important, so early again.
Thank you, Your Honour. Two things. In terms of the two tables which are exhibited, might be useful, Your Honour, just for the present, for those to be marked for identification and then substantively tendered at an appropriate time. And then they, along with the statements, can be made fully available publicly.
Sure, thank you. Well, I mean, I'm happy for them to be given an exhibit number now. I think they did get one, didn't they?
They did get an exhibit number. I think the difficulty is that the media would, I think, like them, Your Honour. We would ordinarily put them onto the website. I think there are some concerns about that. Not that they wouldn't eventually be released, but some concerns about. So perhaps if you, Dr. Pepperton,
So you'd prefer them not to be an exhibit and be marked at this stage?
Well, that's right. The main issue, Your Honour, is we've got no issue at all with their being made available to the media, but they probably ought to be made available with the statements rather than on their own, because they're a bit decontextualised otherwise.
Right. Okay.
Sorry, I'm not meaning to be difficult.
No, that's all right.
Such a
Well, I
diversity.
mean, I don't know that every exhibit has been immediately made available on the. Has it?
if Your Honour's content to hold off, we can do that. I don't want to cause some sort of administrative hurdle. Perhaps we could. I'll address it with my lead over the
I'll
weekend.
deal with it later. It is an exhibit, but it won't immediately
Thank
go
you.
onto the website, and we'll sort out when we can make it available.
Thank you, Your Honour. Can I emphasise we're content for our part for the Porter and Small Page affidavit material to be released to the media as soon as that can be done administratively.
We're
Now,
very efficient in that regard.
frighteningly so, and we're acutely conscious that some of that activity takes place in the early hours of the morning when normal people would be sleeping, but others are attending to their duties. I'd just like to clean up an error that I gather has been identified, Assistant Commissioner, in the section of this document on page 3 in relation to Master TG. Has it been identified by you that there's an error in the fourth column? It should be complaint 10 rather than the date of the complaint should be 10 September rather than 14 September.
That is correct.
All right. Now, just while we're all thinking about issues which have been raised in the course of evidence given by Deputy Commissioner Smallpage, with your oversight on people matters, are you aware of ongoing contact that has taken place between senior members of the police force and others with Constable Rolfe in relation to his well-being?
Yes, I am.
Without going into details, can you identify to Your Honour what has been taking place?
So, Constable Rolfe, since of recent times, was assigned to Acting Commander John Atkin, where John Atkin had responsibility also for his return to work or management of his return to work plan. Constable Rolfe was informed that Acting Commander John Atkin was his executive senior contact, and even up until recently, I've spoken with John. John spoke with Constable Rolfe on the 23rd, the 24th, and I think it was the 26th of January, and his last contact was on the 6th of February. And there has been ongoing contact from the Director, from the HR, Wellbeing and the Health Recovery Unit.
And have various professional persons provided counselling and support as well to Mr. Rolfe in recent times?
Yep, sorry, yes, Your Honour. Is our senior psychologist, Ms. Chantal Barker. She has Zach's direct number and regularly attempts to contact him.
All right, thank you very much. And is there chaplain support as well available for Constable Rolfe whenever he wishes it?
There is, and my understanding is that he has actually been in regular contact with the chaplain here in Alice Springs, because some of the correspondence that I have had with him is he indicated that he had been speaking with the chaplain here in Alice Springs.
Okay. All right, can we go back to the various complaints then, please? And may I take you to the one involving Chris Walker? which relates to an incident on the 22nd of June of 2019. This is the one, Your Honour, where there was a person in the bathroom who expressed very serious concerns about his safety, and that resulted in a number of armed police coming into the house to deal with the situation, and Mr. Rolfe pointed a gun at the person understood to be the offender. Now, was there a professional professional services command investigation into whether this constituted excessive or inappropriate use of force?
We didn't do an investigation per se, but we've done a review of that matter.
Thank you. And that was identified as a result of material that was communicated on Mr. Rolfe's phone to others, is that right?
That is correct.
All right, what is the view that you found and that the PSC found in relation to whether inappropriate conduct took place?
Yep. So, well, first of all, I'd like to say that this matter was not assessed or by Senior Sergeant Barrow as being excessive or inappropriate.
Yes.
On our review, taking into account all the circumstances surrounding that incident and the information that's provided to the members at the time, where all members entered that property either carrying or drawing a firearm or a taser, was appropriate in the circumstances.
And did you set out reviews about that at paragraphs 50 and following of your second affidavit?
Yes, I do.
Let's go straight to the uncomfortable part of this. It is Her Honour has seen on video a still and the live footage from Constable Rolfe's camera of him standing over the individual pointing his weapon at him. What do you say about that in the circumstances? That's aroused concern on the part of some who've seen it.
So our assessment in circumstances is it was not inappropriate because they've gone into a dynamic, volatile situation where they have information of a person in that residence being armed with a knife. You have a person who has locked himself in a toilet, says, advising police communications that he has locked himself in the toilet, that there's an armed offender in his residence. So when clearing that house, even though Mr. Walker at the time had his hands up, he was pushed down. At that point in time, there is still no known information of anyone else in that house. And so the report was someone with a knife. So Constable Rolfe, when he dealt with Mr. Walker, he then continued on clearing the rest of the house, as did other members. And we did not find that inappropriate in the circumstances because of the threat that was posed to them through communication.
Thank you. And on this occasion, Constable Rolfe, to his credit, had activated his body-worn video.
That is correct.
Right, let's move to Antonio Woods. This is an incident on the 28th of June of 2019. And this arose from an allegation and a complaint from Naja on 15 January 2020 that Mr. Woods tripped and fell, and Mr. Rolfe kicked him, someone kicked him some 6 times to the head when he was lying face down on the ground. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, PSC undertook an investigation into that and directed interviews. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And here, what was the evaluation of Professional Services Command?
Again, this is one that was difficult, as in there was a full body-worn video of the incident. Body-worn video was turned on by a second member basically after Mr. Woods was on the ground. However, on taking into account the evidence of the police officers involved and the body-worn that we did have, and taking also into account evidence at the watch house through his custody or health assessment, and during that health assessment there was also a custody nurse on duty there is no medical evidence or sign of injury of any sort that would indicate that a person had been kicked in the head 6 times, which you would anticipate would occur with a person wearing boots and being kicked. And so there is no evidence to support or sustain that allegation.
Nonetheless, was remedial advice provided to Mr. Rolfe on 26 July of 2022 about the non-activation of his body-worn video,
Yes, there was.
and also to Mr. Hanson, who was there with him for this for the same issue.
Yes, that's correct.
And remedial advice was given about collateral matters to Mr. Kirby, Sergeant Kirby.
That is correct.
And you give an account of this in, amongst other places, paragraphs 36 and to 41 of your second affidavit. Is that right?
Yes, that's incorrect in relation to the remedial advice.
But in relation to the substantive matter of paragraphs 164 and following of your first affidavit.
Yes, that's correct. So 164 to 169.
I take you now to an incident on 24 September 2019 that's described as the Todd Tavern incident, where Mr. Rolfe and Mr. Kirstenfeld questioned a man, and a telephone was held up beside the man in an effort to identify him in a similar way to what took place subsequently at House 511. Do you recall this?
Yes.
And what occurred was that the man decamped and he was chased some distance, somewhere between 250 and 400 metres, into the mall, and was apprehended and was taken to hospital for shortness of breath and chest pain. And this was identified by Senior Sergeant Barham as an instance of excessive use of force, with his forming the view that the man at the time where he was pushed into the metal barrier was giving up and force was not necessary, and he could have been directed to simply stop or lie down or similar while he was handcuffed. Is that generally the situation?
Yeah, generally that's the situation.
Now, have you viewed this this video on multiple occasions?
Yes, I have.
Do you have a slight difference of approach from Senior Sergeant Barham, and if so, could you explain why, please?
I have a different assessment or approach from Senior Sergeant Barham, and I did discuss this at length with PSC investigators. Of course, we closely examined that footage. Is Senior Sergeant Barham, in his assessment, he's made an assessment that the gentleman was getting up and that because he had run out of breath. There is no evidence that we could find that would support that assertion. There's nothing on body-worn video to say that he was getting up or running out of breath. Yes, he stopped, like there's a barrier right in front and he was turning.
Yes.
But there was no indication that he was giving up or that he'd run out of breath. And in that situation, we did have, a person who was believed to be an offender running away from police. You have a police officer who's running at full speed, chasing that offender. And when the person stopped to turn, when you go frame by frame, it is only a split-second reaction time for Constable Rolfe to change the direction that he's going, and he pushed that gentleman. So in those circumstances, we could not, in our mind, fully ascertain or determine that is unnecessary, inappropriate, or reasonable or unreasonable application of force.
Nonetheless, was it decided to give remedial advice to Constable Rolfe about how he should go about identifying and communicating with an offender and the need to minimise force and the relevance of OST defensive training?
Yes, he was. Of course, it was highlighting on obviously the 10 operational safety principles
Yes.
in the tactical options model. When you've got to take safety first, risk assessment, take charge. Excuse me, I've got a bit of phlegm in my throat, Your
It's
Honour.
okay, got some water there
Do you need
as well.
some water?
No, I've got water. It's just something there.
It'll be better on Monday.
Yeah, but it's also about, you know, avoiding confrontation,
Yes.
minimum force, avoiding force. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to the tactical options model, it is about your assessment, reassessment, officer presence, safety as a distance. So by Mr. Rolfe putting the phone beside this
Yes.
gentleman's face, he has taken away his ability to assess the situation. He's put himself in close proximity. He can't see what's happening with the hands of that person or what that person intends to do. Didn't follow any of the aspects of the officer safety.
Yeah, and keeping a safe distance in circumstances where there was always the potential for conflict.
That is correct. And by also putting himself that close by a person, he could not see the pre-indicators of a person. And the person obviously took off, so he had no ability to have a reaction time to deal with that situation. And so he chased the person, but then also the situation is when you do go to do use of force, we all have a duty of care to the people we're taking into custody. And with those obstacles around where the use of force was applied, those things need to be taken into consideration when you are taking a person into custody, because we do have a duty of care for the safety of those people.
Thank you. And do you give your account of most of that at paragraph 82 and following of your first affidavit?
Yes, yes.
I'm going to go now, but very briefly, to the matter of Albert Bailey, which is an incident that occurred on the 12th of October of 2019. This is a matter that is not finalised, and it's the matter where I think 5 or 6 members run across the lawn after an incident takes place between a man and a woman, and the outcome of it is that Mr. Bailey has a significant injury to his head requiring sutures.
Yes, that's correct.
This was identified as an issue on 28 January of 2020. Why was it then that it was identified?
It was identified by the officer in charge of the Alice Springs prosecution section when, upon reviewing the body-worn video that was attached to the prosecution file in relation to a Section 41 domestic violence application.
So that officer identified it as an issue and referred it to the Professional Standards Command?
That is correct.
All right. And in due course, Mr. Barham has reviewed it and reached certain opinions, and PSC has reviewed it and reached certain conclusions.
Yes, that is correct. When Mr. Barham identified it, it was already an investigation by the Professional Standards Command. It also came in as a complaint against police a little bit later.
Yes.
But that investigation is still active and it's a live matter with Mr. Rolfe.
Thank you.
Councillor Rolfe.
In those circumstances, Your Honour, I do not propose to ask any further questions in relation to it, and it's something I've discussed with Mr. Officer previously. Now, I then moved to the Uendamu matter on 9 November. In this regard, Mr. Rolfe has been advised that upon his return to work, he will receive remedial advice about a range of matters. Could you identify to Her Honour what he will receive that remedial advice about? Then I'll ask you why other options were not available.
Yeah, there's quite a number of things.
Right, just summarise them for Her Honour if you don't mind.
So the remedial advice is in relation to operational safety principles,
Have you got this document there, the summary?
Yes, I do.
You're allowed to refer to it.
Thank you.
That's all right. Thank you, Your Honour.
So, saying the operational safety
Yeah,
principles.
so 10 operational safety principles, which again involves similar things as in the Todd Tavern. Also, when we talk about the 10 operational safety principles, it's about take charge, make sure you get an appropriate briefing. Then there's the requirement for a reminder for him to wear a vest. He was not wearing his enhanced load bearing vest, as were none of the members that attended. Issues with the placement of his taser, so he didn't have a proper holster for his taser. He made up his own avenue for carrying a taser. There's also some reminders around the assessment reuse of force. He was also wearing a non-approved uniform item, which was a undergarment non-approved vest. Remedial advice will be given, or is given in relation to the powers of entry. We're not saying that the unlawful entry was unlawful, but he used consent. Our assessment was he used consent to enter the property.
Is this 577 or 511?
Both.
Both. All right.
Yeah. Primarily 577. He's using consent. Whereas, as per section 126 of the Police Administration Act, 126 of the Police Administration Act, is you need to form reasonable grounds before entering property. So it's to remind him of how you come to form those reasonable grounds. There's also in relation to not separating as a witness on return back to Alice Springs because of a serious incident. There's some remedial advice in relation to the CPR
resuscitation practices. I want to be clear about this.
Yeah.
What was the issue in terms of the resuscitation?
So there is no
Because-
issue.
Before we go, sorry. Because Constable Rolfe was engaged in significant and energetic efforts in an attempt to resuscitate Kumanjayi at the scene and then over quite a period of time at the station, wasn't he?
Yes, and
So what's the
that is
CPR
fully
issue?
acknowledged.
What's the issue?
So it's the issue with the other members present there was that the cessation of CPR wasn't in line with the current training. So as in the only way you stop CPR in the current training, there's 4 aspects, but primarily the person's recovered.
Yes.
You can't continue because of exhaustion or a qualified medical help arrive,
Yes.
or the person's been announced deceased by a qualified doctor or a qualified paramedic.
Right.
So
Now we need to be very careful about this, Assistant Commissioner, because it's important that neither the community nor the general public through the media misunderstand this. Was there any suggestion that CPR was ceased before it was clinically sensible to do so?
no, there is no indication of that. The only aspect of this one is they ceased because there was phone conversations with 1000 qualified people prior, and there was an undertaking that if we're going to cease CPR, just recontact them to talk
Yes.
about it. And
That didn't happen.
that did not occur.
But is there any suggestion that if it had been continued for a number of extra minutes, it would have made any difference to Kumanjayi's survival?
No, it wouldn't have made any difference, and I think that's been fairly established through evidence given during the inquest and the trial.
No, remedial advice was given to Mr. Hawkins.
Oh, sorry, there is also one other thing.
I'm sorry, yes, something in relation to
Yeah,
reporting.
so it's in breach of the restricted duties policies. Mr. Rolfe was carrying an injury to his thumb, and he provided information that he'd already had his Glock holster unclipped because of the concerns he had with his thumb.
When he went into House 511,
Yes, that's correct.
So he had the holster unclipped because there was an issue with his right thumb.
And so he should have reported to his supervisor
Yes.
that he had an injury that could or may not affect his operational duties, and he did not make that report.
Thank you. Remedial advice was also given to Mr. Hawkins in relation to some similar matters that you itemise on page 8. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Also to Sergeant Frost in relation to operational safety principles, in relation to command and control, in relation to briefing delivery, and also issues in relation to CPR.
That is correct.
And again, does that relate to the same CPR issue?
Yeah, exact same issue.
And what's the situation with Mr. Kirstenfeld?
Mr. Kirstenfeld, he did get remedial advice on the 22nd of February. On 22nd of February.
Right.
Just recently.
In relation to similar matters
Yes,
in
similar
short.
matters.
And likewise, Mr. Reebel.
That is correct.
Now, some of these are serious matters, some of them are less serious. What options were there in terms of any disciplinary proceedings arising from the trial and the expiration of time?
Options were fully available to Professional Standards Command to undertake action under Part 4 if it was deemed to meet those thresholds. Of course, there was a statute extension approved by Judge Morris, which is expiration date of 3 April 2023. But going through the assessment of the whole incident, there was not any what we considered as serious breaches of discipline, but there are matters that were to be brought to their attention that they could learn from.
Thank you. Your Honour, could I just finish this section? It will take
Yes,
5 minutes.
please.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to the next issue involving Mr. Rolfe, which was the failure to disclose some matters at the recruitment stage. Did PSC undertake an investigation to evaluate whether Mr. Rolfe, in a criminal sense, obtained the financial advantage of employment by deliberately making a false representation in the documentation he provided when applying for employment with the Northern Territory Police Force?
Yes, the Professional Standards undertook an investigation.
And did the investigation conclude on the 2nd of July of 2020?
Yes, it did.
And was the decision made that it was inappropriate to bring charges?
Yes, it was.
And were disciplinary options available?
No disciplinary options available. Of course, at the time of the commission of that conduct, Constable Rolfe was not a member of the police force and not subject to Part 4.
Now, there are various matters in respect of the text messages which remain live and where disciplinary action has been taken and a hearing has been conducted by a senior member of the force. Is that right?
I'm sorry, say that again. Sorry.
Yes. A hearing has been it's late in the day. A hearing has been conducted by a senior member of the force, a commander and at times an acting assistant commissioner, in relation to matters arising from the telephone messages that have been the subject of much discussion before Her Honour.
Yes, that is correct.
But has an action for judicial review in respect of the lawfulness of that material being taken in the Supreme Court.
Yes, it is current matter live.
And do you understand that that matter is going to be heard in early May of this year?
That's my understanding, yes.
And if permitted, will the hearing proceed after that, after the ruling from the judge?
That is correct.
Mr. Rolfe wrote, also gave an interview to the Spotlight program and participated in interviews with the Australian, and this came to light at the time in March and May of 2022. Is that so?
Yes, that's correct.
A PSC investigation took place straight away.
Yes, it It did once when it was notified to us, yes, or we identified it, yes, sorry.
And did Constable Rolfe admit breaches of discipline in respect of his conduct?
Yes, he did.
Do you explain that at paragraphs 176 and following of your first affidavit?
I'll check that's right. Yes, that's correct.
And I explained to Her Honour at the recommencement of this hearing that Constable Rolfe was given a direction on 13 May of last year not to do anything that contravenes the media policy, the personal use of social media instruction, and the Code of Conduct and Ethics General Order. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Who gave him that direction?
Acting Commander Collie Anderson of the Professional Standards Command.
And was he also given a notice of determination on the 6th of July to be of good behaviour for 12 months and given a written caution?
A formal written caution, yes, that's correct.
All right. And we don't need to go into further details now, but is it correct that he has been called upon to answer why he has, notwithstanding those matters to which we have just referred, caused to be published a 2,500 word essay a few days ago?
Yes, that's correct, and that is a live matter that he has still time to provide a response.
Yes, and he was given 7 days to do that last Sunday.
That is correct.
All right.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
I've gone quiet, Your Honour, because there are a number of other topics to canvass with the Assistant Commissioner, but this might be a convenient time for a break. Till
Nobody
Monday.
wants to sit on Friday afternoon until the wee hours. I'll take the invitation to adjourn to Monday morning at 9:30.
Full stand, Coronial Court stands adjourned.
You can choose the objective.